Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to wake up one day and find that everyone is gone? No warning, no sign, just an empty world that once bustled with life. I had always thought it was a far-fetched thought, something born out of fear, a random nightmare. But that night, I realized how wrong I was. I had never expected this town to feel so quiet. Maybe it was the late hour, or maybe it was the fact that the town had always been small, too small, maybe, but when the streets were empty, it seemed wrong. The kind of wrong that makes your skin prickle. No cars in the driveways, no voices carrying through the windows, no familiar faces. Just silence. I was used to small towns, but this was different. I had arrived a few weeks ago, seeking refuge. A break from the city, from the noise, from the constant rush of life. But now, the silence that surrounded me felt like it was pressing in, suffocating me. The kind of silence you notice after something terrible happens. The kind of silence that should never be there. The houses around me were eerily still, their windows dark, like the souls inside had been sucked out. At first, it seemed normal. The kind of quiet that settles over a town late at night. But the longer I stood there, the more uneasy I felt. It was like something was off, but I couldn't place it. Something in the air, maybe. Something in the atmosphere that made me feel like I was being watched. I pulled the collar of my jacket up around my neck and started walking. The streets were empty, no sign of anyone at all. And yet, the more I walked, the more I felt eyes on me. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, and a chill that wasn't from the cold seeped into my bones. There was a faint rustling, like footsteps in the distance, but when I turned around, there was nothing. I shook my head. Just nerves, I muttered to myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just nerves. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was wrong. As I walked past the old church at the corner, something caught my eye. A flash of movement, just a blur, in the corner of a window. I stopped in my tracks, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. But then it was gone. I glanced around again, the eerie stillness of the town hanging heavy in the air. There was no sign of life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. Something just out of sight, lingering, watching. I hurried my pace, my footsteps echoing louder than I would have liked. But then I stopped. My eyes landed on something that made my heart skip a beat. There, on the ground, were tracks. Not just any tracks, but strange, twisting marks in the dirt. Almost like a trail leading off into the woods behind the houses. But they didn't look natural. They were uneven, as if something had been dragged along the ground. The shape wasn't right, too jagged, too uneven. I knelt down to examine them, my breath shallow in my chest. Something about them sent a wave of dread through me. I couldn't explain it, but I knew these weren't tracks left by an animal or a vehicle. They felt wrong, like they had been made by something that shouldn't exist. A chill crept up my spine as I stood back up. The air around me felt thick now, almost suffocating. My mind raced, but the only thing that kept running through it was one question: where was everyone? I looked toward the house at the end of the street. It was dark, too, but I thought I saw a faint flicker of movement behind the curtains. My pulse quickened, but before I could take a step toward it, a voice echoed in my mind. Get out. The voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it felt like it came from everywhere. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. My breath hitched. I turned in a slow circle, but there was nothing. Just the same empty street, the same stillness. But that voice, it wouldn't leave me. It felt like it had followed me. I stepped back, my mind spinning. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I had been alone for too long. But something inside me knew I wasn't alone. I turned around to head back to my car, but as I walked, the world around me shifted. The streetlights flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging everything into darkness. A sudden gust of wind swept through the empty street, carrying with it a coldness that cut straight through my jacket. My breath puffed in the air in front of me, visible in the icy chill that settled in. And then I heard it. A scream. Distant. Faint. But unmistakable. I stopped dead in my tracks. My blood ran cold. The scream wasn't one of pain, it was one of pure, unfiltered terror. It echoed through the empty streets, sending a wave of panic through me. But the worst part? It came from all around me. It wasn't coming from any one place. It seemed to surround me, closing in. I spun around again, searching for the source, but found nothing. The silence returned, even heavier than before. Get out. The voice came again, louder this time, more urgent. I couldn't stay here. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal. My heart pounded as I turned and ran. The streets blurred past me, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind me. Something was chasing me, and I could hear it, just out of sight, getting closer with each passing second. And then, I saw it. A figure. A shadow. Moving in the darkness, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. It was tall, too tall, and its movements were jerky, unnatural. It didn't belong. It couldn't. I stumbled backward, my legs giving way beneath me. My hands shook as I scrambled to push myself off the ground. The shadow moved closer, its steps slow but deliberate. I had to get out of here. I had to. But no matter how fast I ran, the shadows followed. Always one step behind. I had never been more terrified in my life. Where had everyone gone? I didn't stop running. My breath came in sharp gasps, my heart hammering in my chest, drowning out every other sound. The figure, no, the shadows, were still behind me. But how could something so wrong keep pace with me? It was impossible. The streets seemed to stretch out endlessly. How had I ended up so far from the main road? I hadn't noticed the familiar landmarks fade away. I couldn't focus. All that mattered was getting away from whatever was following me. The wind whipped past my face, and I could feel the chill seeping deeper into my bones. It was like the town itself was conspiring against me. I turned a corner, thinking I was heading toward the town square, but I was met with an unsettling sight, a dark alley stretching impossibly far into the gloom. I didn't remember this place. I didn't remember the alley ever being here. A faint light flickered at the far end, but it did nothing to erase the dark sense of dread creeping over me. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath. The night felt too still, too silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just me. And the shadows. I glanced over my shoulder, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move, a blur in the darkness, too quick to make out. My pulse quickened. No, I couldn't look back. I had to keep moving. I stumbled into the alley. The walls seemed too close now. Too high. The shadows that stretched across them felt like they were alive, watching me. The air grew thick, each breath harder to take. I reached the end of the alley, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw someone, a figure, standing under the flickering light. It was just a shadow, but it looked human. For a heartbeat, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe someone else was here. But then the figure shifted. It wasn't human. It was wrong. Its shape bent and distorted, as if it was struggling to hold a form. The light flickered more violently now, casting long, grotesque shadows across its body. I could see eyes, if you could even call them eyes, like deep, empty sockets that seemed to gaze through me, hollow and dark. I froze. The cold air wrapped around me like a vice, and I felt the walls closing in. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its presence, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't look away, but my mind screamed at me to run. But where? I took a tentative step back, and the figure jerked forward, its movements unnatural and jerky. Then it froze again. And then, slowly, it started to move toward me. I snapped out of my stupor and turned, running as fast as I could, but I could hear it behind me. The scraping sound of something dragging along the ground. Something that didn't belong in this world. I reached the street again, but now it was different. The houses were gone. The lights, the signs, everything that made the town familiar was missing. In their place were walls, strange black walls stretching as far as I could see, closing in on me. I didn't know what was happening. My mind was unraveling, each thought more desperate than the last. Get out. The voice whispered again, and this time it wasn't in my head. I turned to the source. There, standing in the doorway of a building that hadn't been there before, was someone. I should have been relieved. I should have been thankful to find another person. But I couldn't move. I couldn't take a step closer. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, bathed in darkness, like it was waiting for me. Please. I whispered to myself. I had to reach them. I had to understand what was going on. The fear had consumed me, but there was still a shred of logic buried beneath the panic. I took a step forward. The ground beneath me gave way. I was falling. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the middle of the street. My body was sore, as if I had been thrown onto the ground. The darkness that had swallowed me was now gone, but the silence was suffocating. I could barely breathe as I stood up, shaking. I looked around, and the town was still there, but something was wrong. It wasn't just the emptiness. It was the feeling of being completely alone. I reached out for my phone, desperate for any sign of life, but there was nothing. No service. No calls. No messages. The screen was cracked, the glass spider-webbed. It wasn't the phone I remembered. It wasn't the world I remembered. The walls of the buildings had a strange texture to them, almost like they weren't even real. And as I stumbled down the street, my eyes caught a glimpse of something written on the side of one of the buildings. At first, I thought it was just graffiti, but as I got closer, I realized it was more. It was a message. You're still here. My breath hitched in my chest. The letters were hastily scrawled, as though they had been written in a hurry. But there was something so chilling about them, something that made my heart race faster. Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard the sound again. The scraping, the shuffling of footsteps. But this time, it wasn't far away. It was close. Too close. I turned, and there it was. The figure from the alley. But now, it was in the street, walking slowly toward me, dragging its limbs as it came. Its shape was even more distorted now, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And that voice. "You're still here." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And then everything went silent. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. My legs felt like they were cemented to the ground, my breath caught in my throat. There was no escaping this. I had thought I was alone, but this was far worse. This thing wasn't just some figment of my imagination. It was real. And it was getting closer. Every step it took was deliberate, slow, like it was savoring the moment. Its eyes gleamed with an unholy hunger, a deep, endless void that threatened to swallow everything around it. The scraping sound grew louder with each dragging step, echoing through the empty streets. It was almost like it was coming from inside my own skull. I tried to move, to run, but my body refused to obey. It felt as though the air itself had thickened, pressing in on me, trapping me in place. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, cracked. No sound would come out. Then it stopped. Just a few feet away from me, it froze in place, its face, if you could even call it a face, twisting, contorting as though it were struggling to remember what it was supposed to be. The shadowy figure loomed over me, too close. Too real. The voice. That voice, still soft but insistent, whispered again. "You're still here." The words rattled around in my head like something breaking apart. I couldn't comprehend them. I didn't want to. It didn't make sense. I backed up, still unable to fully control my limbs, stumbling over the cracked pavement. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard from miles away. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me with its hollow eyes. Suddenly, there was a flicker. The streetlights buzzed and dimmed, then flickered back on, casting the entire scene in an unnatural, sickly light. The walls of the building seemed to warp, twisting in on themselves like a funhouse mirror. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but nothing changed. The darkness around me was thickening, becoming more oppressive. The air felt wrong, like it was alive, like it was closing in on me. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. I stood there, motionless, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I felt as though I had been holding my breath for too long, but now I couldn't tell if I was even breathing at all. I wasn't alone anymore. Not just with the figure. Something else was with me, watching from the shadows. I could feel it, lurking in every corner of my vision. The quiet street had transformed into a maze of distorted angles and warped walls, every structure bleeding into the next, as if nothing was solid anymore. Everything felt off. Every corner held something waiting, lurking just beyond my sight. I took a few cautious steps forward, trying to steady myself. My mind was in a haze, thoughts scrambling, but there was something that stood out above everything else. The walls. The walls were covered in more of those cryptic messages. Scrawled hastily, smeared, the letters not quite legible, but the message was clear. "They are watching you. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Who? Who was watching me? I ran my hand along the wall, the cold surface sending a shock of panic through my body. The smell in the air had changed, too. It wasn't just the typical night air anymore. It smelled wrong. Like damp, rotting earth. Like decay. There was no sound. The silence was suffocating. Not even the usual rustling of trees or the distant hum of life. The town was holding its breath. I reached for my phone again, though I knew there would be no signal. The screen flickered to life, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something. Something on the screen. But when I checked, it was just static. Nothing more. I was about to drop it when I noticed something odd. A new message. It was a notification, but not one that could have come from any of my apps. You can't escape. I felt my heart skip a beat. My mind raced. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But the weight of it, the truth behind those words, was undeniable. I stumbled backward, hitting my head on the wall behind me, sending a shock of pain through my skull. The sudden jolt broke through my panic, and I could finally think clearly. I had to get out. But where? Which way? Everything had changed. There was no escape. No exit. I turned and ran again, this time with a sense of desperation. My feet pounded against the pavement, but every turn I took led me deeper into the labyrinth of unfamiliar streets. I had to get out. I had to. I stopped dead in my tracks. At the end of the street, standing under the flickering streetlight, was the figure again. But it wasn't alone. There were others now. Shadows. Figures. Silent. Watching. The message was clear. I wasn't alone anymore. And I never would be again. My breath hitched as I stood frozen, staring at the figures under the dim, flickering streetlight. There were more of them now. I could make out their shapes, their outlines, human, but twisted. They were motionless, like statues, but I felt the weight of their gaze on me. Silent. Unblinking. I took a step back, then another, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might shatter my ribs. I couldn't stop. My body had already decided what I had to do. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the uneven pavement, the air thick with dread. Every corner, every turn I made only led me deeper into the maze of twisted streets. It was as if the town itself had shifted, rearranged, and I was lost within it. The further I ran, the more the silence enveloped me. It was unnatural. A suffocating, oppressive quiet that seemed to push in from every side. The only sounds were the frantic rhythm of my own steps and my ragged breath, but even they felt distant, as if the world around me was slowly fading away. I didn't dare look behind me. I couldn't. The fear of seeing them again, the figures in the street, kept me focused on the road ahead. I kept running, mindlessly, desperately, as the world around me became more and more distorted. I could see the familiar outline of the old church ahead, at least something that felt like home. It wasn't far now. I could make it. Maybe I could hide there. But just as the church came into view, a cold gust of wind blew through, and something caught my eye. It wasn't the wind. It was the sky. The clouds. They weren't moving right. The air was thick, heavy, and I could see something darker, something unnatural shifting behind the veil of clouds, something watching. Something waiting. I stopped running. My feet suddenly felt heavy, as if the ground itself was resisting me. I turned back, and that's when I saw them closer now. The figures from the street were following me. Slowly, deliberately. There were no sounds, no footsteps, but I could feel them getting closer. The air grew colder, a biting chill creeping under my skin. Every instinct told me to keep moving, to keep running, but my body froze. The world seemed to slow as I took in their details. They weren't just shadows anymore. They had formed distinct, clear shapes, though there was nothing about them that felt solid. They were humanoid, but their faces, if you could call them faces, were just hollow, empty pits. Eyes that were too wide, mouths stretched too thin, a mockery of human features. And then they moved. No sound. No warning. One moment they were still, and the next, they were lunging toward me, their bodies jerking unnaturally as if controlled by invisible strings. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to turn and run again, but my legs wouldn't move. They were stiff, unwilling to obey. I was trapped. In the middle of the street, surrounded by nothing but shadows that were closing in. My pulse pounded in my ears, my throat dry. I couldn't scream. Suddenly, I heard a voice, low, guttural, coming from nowhere, or perhaps everywhere. "You should have never come here." The words echoed in my skull, bouncing around like a mantra I couldn't escape. The figures had stopped now, standing around me in a perfect circle, their hollow eyes fixed on me. They seemed to be watching, waiting, as though expecting something. My breath came out in short gasps. "What do you want?" I forced the words out, but I knew I wasn't ready for the answer. Another voice, this one a whisper, barely audible above the silence, responded. "We are the Forgotten." I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. I tried to move again, desperate, but my body still refused to cooperate. My thoughts were scattered, fear clouding everything, but I managed to make sense of one thing: I had to get away. One of the figures took a step forward, its long, spindly fingers stretching toward me, its face still obscured in shadow. I couldn't look away from it. The closer it came, the more suffocating the air became. My mind raced, but there was nothing, no escape. Suddenly, without warning, it lunged at me. I closed my eyes, instinctively throwing my arms up to protect myself, but it never made contact. Instead, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a cold, biting sensation like ice penetrating my skin. I opened my eyes, but I was no longer standing on the street. The world had shifted again. The sky was darker, the buildings more twisted, as if the entire town had contorted into a nightmare. And in front of me, the figures were no longer standing still. They were moving in unison now, their limbs stretching unnaturally, jerking in a rhythmic, eerie dance. And then, they spoke in unison. "You are one of us now." The words slammed into me, crashing through my mind like a tidal wave. My body felt numb, my vision blurred. I could barely stand. I stumbled backward, heart racing, but I couldn't escape them. They were everywhere. And then, the ground beneath me gave way. Everything went black. When I woke, I was no longer standing in the street or in the twisted version of the town. The world around me felt wrong, like it was not a place I recognized. The air was thick with an unearthly stillness, and the ground beneath me was soft, almost as if it were made of damp earth. My body ached, my head spinning, and I couldn't remember how I had gotten here. The silence was deafening. There was no wind, no sound of birds or distant traffic, just the heavy weight of nothing. I slowly sat up, my hands trembling as I pressed them into the cool, moist earth. My breath was shallow, my heart still racing from the panic of what had just happened. The figures. The voices. I shuddered, trying to push the images from my mind. I scanned the space around me. It was a dark, foggy clearing, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a nightmare, but it was eerily familiar. The trees were twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, blocking any view of the sky. There was no clear path, no road, no sign of life, except for the distant shapes moving in the fog. Figures. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak. Everything seemed to spin around me, and I had to clutch a nearby tree to steady myself. What is this place? I thought, but the answer didn't come. Suddenly, I heard it, the faintest sound, like a distant whisper. The wind had picked up, and as it blew through the trees, the rustling of the leaves sounded almost intentional, like it was trying to speak. I couldn't understand it at first, but then, through the murmur of the wind, I began to make out words. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice was faint, barely audible over the rustling of the trees. But it was unmistakable. I'm not supposed to be here? What did that mean? I stumbled forward, following the barely discernible path that wound through the clearing. The figures in the distance were still there, lingering, but they weren't moving anymore. They were watching. Watching me. Waiting. The fog seemed to grow thicker as I moved, swirling around my feet, creeping up my legs like a living thing. My breath hitched as I realized I wasn't just lost in a fog, the fog was closing in on me. Was it chasing me? I forced myself to move faster. Panic was clawing at my chest, but I couldn't stop. I had to find a way out. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A light. A flicker, small but bright, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. It was a sign someone was out there. Maybe someone who could help. I began to run toward it, my heart pounding, the fog thickening around me with every step. But the closer I got, the more the light seemed to shift. It was moving. Just out of reach, always a step ahead of me. My mind screamed at me to stop, but I couldn't. I had to get to it. And then, as if in response to my desperation, the figures in the fog started to move. They began to shuffle toward me, their distorted shapes becoming clearer, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The air grew colder. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I could hear them now, the figures, whispers that seemed to be speaking my name, calling me, urging me to stop. But I couldn't. I didn't know why, but I couldn't stop running. Suddenly, the fog cleared just enough for me to see where I was. The ground beneath me was no longer earth, but hard, cold stone, and in front of me stood a massive structure. A building. It looked like the old church, but wrong. The walls were crumbling, the windows shattered, and the door was slightly ajar, beckoning me inside. I didn't think. I just ran toward it. The moment I stepped through the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. I stumbled forward, my hands outstretched in front of me, trying to feel my way through the thick, suffocating blackness. The silence was unbearable. I couldn't hear anything. No footsteps, no whispers, nothing. The only thing I could feel was a strange, unsettling presence. I wasn't alone. I heard the scraping of something across the floor, slow and deliberate. My skin prickled with fear, and I turned in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing. Just darkness. And then, a whisper. "Welcome home." I froze. The voice was behind me, so close I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but there was still nothing. I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, and I felt like I was suffocating. What was this place? What was happening? The whisper came again, but this time it was different. It was louder. And it didn't come from behind me. It came from inside my head. "You're one of us now." The walls of the church seemed to close in around me. The floor beneath me began to shift and groan as if it were alive. I was trapped. The air was thick with an unbearable presence, and the more I tried to fight it, the more it consumed me. I heard the figures again. Their whispers, their movements, closing in on me. They were here, in this church, and I wasn't going to make it out. But then, everything went black. Have you ever looked into a mirror and seen something that wasn't quite right? Something that shouldn't have been there, yet you couldn't shake the feeling that it was real? That's how it started for me. It was just an ordinary day when I found it. An old mirror hidden in the attic of the crumbling mansion I had recently inherited. My aunt's estate, tucked away in the countryside, was nothing but an old relic of a once grand past. But it was mine now. Or so I thought. The first time I looked at the mirror, it was nothing special. It was large, framed in dark wood, the glass slightly fogged from years of disuse. The kind of thing you'd expect to find in a dusty corner, half forgotten. It reflected the dim light of the attic, showing nothing but the usual clutter of old furniture and boxes. But then, something changed. I don't know when exactly. I had been staring at it, half lost in thought, when the reflection caught my eye. My own face, staring back at me. Only, it wasn't quite right. It was subtle, at first, a slight distortion in my features, an unusual darkness around my eyes. I thought it was just a poor lighting, maybe a trick of the dust in the air. But no! The reflection was changing. Gradually, as though the mirror itself was alive, it began to twist, pulling my image into something darker, something wrong. My eyes grew wider, my face contorting in a way that was unnatural. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a fleeting moment of panic. I laughed it off, shaking my head. A trick of the light. But there was something about that mirror, something that pulled at me, a strange force that made it impossible to ignore. As the days passed, I found myself drawn to it. At first, I would only glance at it out of the corner of my eye. But each time, the reflection was more vivid, more sinister. The changes were subtle, almost imperceptible, but they were there. My reflection would twitch, my face stretching in ways it shouldn't. I'd blink, and for a moment, I could have sworn it wasn't me at all. One evening, I stood before it for what seemed like hours. The room around me was silent, too quiet, the air heavy with a strange chill. I had to know if I was imagining things. I stared at myself in the mirror, my own face growing clearer as the seconds stretched on. The darkness around my eyes deepened. My skin looked pale, almost ashen. Then, it happened again. The reflection shifted. A shadow moved behind me, lingering in the corner of the glass. But when I turned around, there was nothing. Just the empty attic, dimly lit by the setting sun. I could hear the whispers then. Soft at first, just a murmur of voices in the distance, but growing louder. The reflection in the mirror seemed to smile, but it wasn't my smile. It was something else, something I couldn't place. It was as though my own face was mocking me, twisting into something monstrous. I couldn't tear my gaze away. I reached out toward the mirror, my hand trembling, and the cold surface of the glass sent a shock through me. It felt wrong, as if I were touching something otherworldly. For a moment, I thought I saw something move within the reflection, a figure, tall and gaunt, standing just behind me. No, it's just the light, just the shadows, I thought. But the figure didn't fade. It remained, its silhouette sharp against the darkening background of the mirror. And then, it stepped forward. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, but the room was empty. The attic, as I had left it, was silent. My heart raced. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, standing behind me. Its face was hidden in shadow, its body tall and skeletal. It didn't move, but it was there, watching. I backed away, stumbling over the old crates in my path, never once breaking my gaze from the mirror. My mind screamed at me to leave, to forget what I had seen. But I couldn't. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I had seen something that shouldn't have been there. Something that wasn't a trick of the light. The mirror was no longer just a reflection. It was something else. Something alive. The figure in the glass didn't disappear that night. It stayed, lingering, watching, waiting. And as I lay awake in bed that night, the whispers never stopped. The next morning, I tried to shake off what had happened. I told myself it was nothing more than an overactive imagination, a trick of the light, perhaps even the stress of moving into a new house. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something in that attic, something in that mirror, was calling to me. The whispers hadn't stopped. They were faint, like the echo of distant voices, but they seemed to come from the mirror. Every time I passed by it, I could feel them tugging at the edge of my mind, drawing me in. It was as if the mirror had become a portal to something else, something dark and dangerous. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know what was happening. So, I went back up to the attic, alone. The air was thick with dust, the silence pressing on me. The mirror was still there, standing tall against the far wall, as if waiting for me. I approached it slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. My reflection seemed almost normal at first. But as I stared, I could feel the pull of the darkness, the shift in the air, and then it happened again. The reflection was changing. This time, it wasn't just my face that distorted. The entire room around me began to warp, as if the glass itself was melting into something else. The shadows grew longer, darker, twisting around the edges of the room. The whispers turned to words, barely audible but unmistakably there. Come closer. I froze. My reflection smiled, grinned, and it wasn't my smile. It was wide, twisted, and somehow malicious. The figure behind me, the one I had seen the night before, was closer now, its face coming into focus. But it wasn't human. It had no eyes, just hollow sockets that seemed to stare into me. Its skin was stretched tight, almost translucent, as if it had been pulled too thin. I gasped and stepped back, but the reflection didn't move. It stayed, frozen in that grotesque moment. The figure reached out, its hand coming through the glass. I stumbled back, knocking over an old chair. The figure's fingers, long, bony, and twisted, touched the surface of the glass, pressing against it. I could feel its presence in the room, the temperature dropping, a cold chill that clung to my skin. What is this? What is it? The question spiraled in my mind, but the only thing I could hear were the whispers, louder now, almost urgent, "Come closer." I fought the urge to step forward, but I couldn't move away. The mirror had a grip on me, pulling me in. The reflection shifted again, the figure now closer, its face so near I could almost feel its breath. The air was thick with a suffocating weight, as if the very room was pressing in on me. It reached for me, its hand coming through the glass, inches from my face. I screamed and stumbled back, tripping over the same chair I had knocked over earlier. My mind screamed for me to run, to get out of there, but my feet wouldn't move. My heart raced in my chest, and the room spun around me. The reflection in the mirror shifted again. It wasn't just a distorted version of me anymore. It was something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. A figure appeared beside me in the reflection. But it wasn't me. It was me, but not. Its face was pale, eyes wide and unblinking, its expression hollow, lifeless. My reflection, it was a copy of me, but it was dead. I could hear my own breath, shallow and panicked, but the reflection didn't move with me. It stood still, its hollow eyes never leaving mine. I tried to look away, to pull myself out of the trance that the mirror seemed to have on me. But no matter how hard I tried, my gaze was fixed. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, surrounding me with a sound that echoed in my head. "It's too late." The words were clear now, not a whisper anymore, but a command, a threat. And that's when I realized the truth. The mirror wasn't just reflecting my face. It was reflecting something else. Something I didn't understand. Something that wanted me. I took a deep breath and forced myself to turn away from the mirror. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed me, growing louder with each step I took. The coldness lingered in the air, and I could feel the weight of the mirror's presence pressing against me. I had to leave. I had to get away. But when I turned to leave the attic, I caught one last glimpse of the reflection in the mirror. The figure, the version of me, was still there, standing in the same place. Only now, it was grinning. And the smile stretched wider, far too wide to be human. And then it spoke, the words coming clear through the reflection. "You can't run. You can't hide." I ran, but it was too late. I don't know how I made it out of that attic. My legs felt like they were moving on their own, carrying me down the stairs, away from the mirror. But the air was still thick with the cold, and the whispers followed me, seeping through the walls, under the floorboards, as if they were coming from all around. I had to get out of the house. But no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. I ran through the halls, my heart pounding in my chest. I barely registered the dust, the forgotten furniture, the decaying wood under my feet. All I could think about was the mirror. That thing in it, that reflection. It wasn't just a trick of the light anymore. It wasn't just my mind playing games. It was real. And it wanted something from me. I burst through the door to the kitchen, gasping for air. I slammed the door behind me, pressing my back against it, as if somehow the wood could protect me. But I knew it couldn't. There was no protection. No escape. The silence was deafening. The house had stopped creaking. The whispers were gone. But the absence of sound made my skin crawl. It felt wrong. Too quiet. I stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was I hallucinating? Was it the stress? I didn't know anymore. The mirror had twisted everything. a strange noise broke the silence. A creak. But this time, it didn't come from the house. It came from inside me. I blinked, confused, and the creak came again, but louder, more insistent. I stepped forward, my mind racing, and turned to the source of the sound. It came from the dark hallway leading to the living room. The hallway was bathed in shadows, and I could barely make out the edges of the furniture that lined the walls. But something was there. Something wasn't right. I squinted, trying to focus. My stomach churned, my head felt light. And then I saw it. A movement. A shadow, just a flicker, but it was there. Someone, was standing at the end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat. It was the figure. I knew it. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its form was wrong. I could see the distortion of its body in the dim glow, like it was made from shadows themselves. I backed away, my legs shaking, heart racing. It was getting closer. Every time I blinked, it moved forward, the darkness seeming to consume it and spit it out again. Then I saw something in its hand. A mirror. The reflection of the figure was twisted and deformed, just like before. The dead smile was still there, stretched across its face, but its eyes were no longer hollow. They were alive. They glowed faintly, but they weren't human. I turned and ran. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the empty house, the sound of something chasing me growing louder with every step. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but I could feel the presence behind me, right on my heels. I didn't stop until I reached the front door, my hand trembling as I fumbled for the handle. But the door wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, panic setting in. No. No, no, no. The mirror. I had to destroy it. It was the source of all of this, the reason why everything was falling apart. With my heart pounding in my chest, I turned and ran back through the house. The whispers had returned, but this time they were louder, more frantic, like they were inside my head, urging me to hurry. I reached the attic door, my hand shaking as I threw it open. The mirror was still there, standing tall in the middle of the room. It was calling to me. I could feel it pulling me in, even as I stood there, frozen in terror. But I couldn't let it win. I couldn't let it take me. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a heavy old book, and hurled it at the mirror. It shattered with a deafening crack, sending shards of glass flying in all directions. I stood there, panting, staring at the broken reflection. For a moment, everything was still. But then, a shadow moved within the shards. The figure, its form splintered and broken just like the mirror. Its eyes glowed with an intensity one had never seen before. The smile stretched impossibly wide. It's not over. I turned and ran from the attic, my mind spinning. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, feeding off my fear, feeding off the reflection, the mirror that had somehow opened a doorway into something else, something that wanted to keep me trapped in this nightmare forever. And I realized, as the whispers grew louder, it wasn't just the house anymore. It was me. It was coming for me. And there was nowhere left to hide. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating, wrapping itself around me like an invisible hand. I stumbled forward, my legs weak, unsteady. I had to get out of here. There was no way I could survive another second in this house. But the more I moved, the more the house seemed to shift. The walls closed in. The ceilings grew lower. I kept running, but everything felt wrong. The floor beneath my feet creaked in a strange rhythm, as though the house itself was toying with me. I could hear the whispers now, louder, clearer, like voices calling my name from the darkness. But there was no one here. Just me. Alone. Or was I? I tried to push open the front door again, but it was still locked. The door wouldn't open. I rattled the handle, desperate, slamming my body against the wood, but it was no use. I was trapped. The house was alive. I turned around, looking for anything, any way out. And that's when I saw it, the mirror, still intact in the corner of the living room. Its surface gleamed in the dim light, the shards of the broken reflection scattered on the floor like pieces of a shattered nightmare. I couldn't escape. The mirror was everywhere. No matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I tried to hide, it was always there. Watching. Waiting. For me to come back. I knew what I had to do. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, pressing against my ears. It wasn't just the house. It was the mirror. It was calling me back. It was feeding on my fear, on my doubt, on my hesitation. If I didn't confront it, if I didn't destroy it completely, it would never stop. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. The broken pieces of the mirror glistened on the floor, sharp and dangerous, reflecting the darkness around them. The image of the figure, twisted and dark, flashed in my mind. It was in the mirror. It always was. And I had to destroy it. I picked up a shard of glass. The sharp edges bit into my palm, but I didn't care. I was done running. With a strangled cry, I threw the shard at the mirror. It hit the glass, but this time there was no shattering sound. The mirror absorbed it. The shard vanished as though the glass had swallowed it whole. I froze. My heart stopped. The mirror had taken it. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices now, pressing in on all sides, filling my head. I could feel the house bending around me, warping, shifting. I was not alone. And then I saw it. The figure was back, but this time it wasn't just in the reflection. It was standing right in front of me. In the living room. Flesh and shadows. Its form flickered, twisted, like a broken reflection, flickering between reality and nightmare. It smiled, but it wasn't human. Its mouth stretched too wide, its teeth sharp, jagged. The eyes, those glowing eyes, burned with an unnatural light, empty of anything human. I could feel it. It was pulling me in. The mirror. The thing in front of me. They were one and the same. I was inside the mirror now. Inside its world. You shouldn't have come back, the voice whispered, not from its mouth, but from every corner of the room, from inside my own head. I backed away, stumbling. But no matter how far I went, the figure followed, its eyes never leaving me. It was closer now, almost too close, as if it were inside me, breathing my air, sharing my fear. How do I stop this? The whispers answered me, their voices growing more insistent. You can't. You're already here. I turned to the broken mirror. The pieces on the floor now glowed, like 1,000 little eyes staring back at me. I had to end it. But how? I picked up another shard, trembling. My reflection, no, not my reflection anymore, smiled back at me, its face twisted and wrong, its mouth gaping open in a silent scream. "You can't escape," it said, its voice a low growl. I was losing myself. I was becoming it. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. The house, the mirror, it had me trapped, feeding on my fear, feeding on my doubt. The figure took a step forward. The air around me was thick, suffocating, pressing me down. My vision blurred. The room seemed to spin, the walls closing in, the floor shifting beneath me. And then I heard it. A crack. A low, eerie sound. It was coming from the mirror. Something was breaking. The mirror, the reflection, the thing inside it, it was collapsing. But as I reached out to touch the glass, to try to stop it, I heard one final whisper, soft, calm. "It's too late." And then everything went black. I awoke to silence. A heavy, crushing silence. The kind that presses on your chest, makes it hard to breathe. My mind was foggy, disoriented, unsure of where I was or how long I'd been unconscious. My surroundings felt wrong, like the world had shifted while I was out. I opened my eyes, blinking against the darkness, the dim light from a single flickering bulb casting long shadows on the walls. The familiar surroundings of the house, if it could still be called that, were gone. The living room was empty. The mirror, shattered on the floor, was gone. Had I destroyed it? Had I somehow escaped? But no, I wasn't free. There was a feeling in the pit of my stomach, a gnawing sense that something had changed, something had followed me. It was here, somewhere, lurking in the space around me. The walls felt closer now, too tight, too intimate. The air, thick with dust and something else, something older, clung to me like a second skin. The floor creaked under my feet as I stood, taking cautious steps forward. The house, or whatever it was now, groaned in response, like it was alive, like it was waiting for me. I rubbed my eyes, hoping to shake the feeling, but it was always there, pressing against my mind. I reached the hallway, hesitant. The rooms on either side were dark, the doors closed. But I could hear them, the whispers. The voices that had filled my mind earlier were now muffled, distant. They were in the walls, in the very structure of the house. I stumbled toward the stairs, drawn by a pull I couldn't explain. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, my legs aching with every movement. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, taunting me, urging me forward. "No, don't go up there." But I had to. I didn't know why, but I couldn't stop myself. The house was calling me. It needed me. I reached the top of the stairs and paused, my breath caught in my throat. There was a door at the end of the hall, one that hadn't been there before. It was old, worn, like it had been forgotten for years. The wood was cracked, the paint peeling, and there was a faint smell, a mixture of mildew and something rotting. The whispers grew silent. Waiting. I had to open it. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open. The hinges screamed in protest. And as the door creaked wide, I saw it. The mirror. It stood in the center of the room, framed in tarnished gold, its surface smooth and pristine, as though it had never been broken. And standing in front of it was me. No, not me. Not really. The reflection smiled back at me, its eyes wide and empty, hollow. The same twisted, broken grin stretched across its face. Its skin, pale and unnatural, seemed to flicker with darkness, as if it were fading in and out of existence. The reflection moved on its own, its actions not matching mine. It was watching me. It was waiting. I stepped forward, drawn in by the gaze of the thing in the mirror. I couldn't look away. I couldn't pull myself back. The figure raised its hand, slowly, and I mirrored it. But when I moved, it didn't stop. It kept going. It reached out of the mirror. I froze. It was no longer just a reflection. It was real. The thing in the mirror, my reflection, stepped forward, its hand coming toward me. It was touching the glass. It was coming for me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, with a sickening lurch, it broke through the surface of the mirror, its hand sliding out from the frame. It was no longer a reflection. It was real. Its eyes, empty and black, locked onto mine, and it smiled, its mouth stretching far too wide. I was no longer alone. I screamed. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure in the mirror was no longer bound by the glass. It was in the room with me now. I could feel its breath on my neck, hot and foul. Its fingers brushed my arm, sending a chill through my body. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. It was too fast. Too strong. "You can't escape," it whispered. Its voice was my voice, but twisted, distorted. "You belong to the mirror now." The darkness around me seemed to swallow the room whole, and the air grew thick, suffocating. The walls closed in on me. The floor cracked beneath my feet. I reached for the door, my hands trembling, but it wouldn't open. I was trapped. There was no escape. And then, the whispers, the voice, spoke again. "Welcome home." And the room faded to black. Have you ever felt the weight of silence? Not just the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that presses in on you from all sides, as if the world itself is holding its breath. The question hung in the air like the damp mist swirling around the trees. I could feel my heart skip a beat. It wasn't the kind of question you asked in passing. There was something about it, a coldness, that seeped deep into my bones. The others in the group didn't seem to notice, lost in their own chatter as we moved along the riverbank, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. But for me, the forest felt wrong. We had been traveling for hours, following the winding trail that led deeper into the woods, the river at our side. It was a place I had only heard whispers about. A place where the locals spoke in hushed tones, warning of strange occurrences, of people who had gone missing and never returned. But that was all just folklore, right? Nothing more than stories meant to frighten children. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The river itself was beautiful. The water glistened like liquid silver under the fading light of the afternoon, its surface rippling gently as it carved its way through the dense forest. But there was something unnerving about it, something I couldn't place. The way it seemed to stretch on endlessly, the way the trees leaned toward the water, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. One of the group members, Mark, turned to look at me, his brow furrowing. "Hear what?" he asked, but his voice carried a slight edge. We had been walking for hours, and the fatigue was starting to show on everyone's faces. "I don't know." It was like a rustle, but it was too quiet, like it was coming from inside my head. I hesitated, wondering if I was just imagining it. I wasn't exactly in the best frame of mind, coming off a stressful few months, trying to find a sense of peace. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Great. Now you've got me listening for it, Mark said with a chuckle, but the unease in his voice was unmistakable. The group fell silent for a moment, the only sound the occasional bird call and the distant rush of water. The trees around us stood tall and still, their branches interwoven, blocking out most of the sky. A sense of isolation settled over us, heavier than before. We pushed forward, our footsteps crunching on the dry leaves. And then I heard it again. A low rustle. This time, I was certain. It came from behind us. I turned quickly, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing there. Just trees. Just the river. Probably just a deer, I muttered to myself, though I didn't quite believe it. Mark glanced back too, his face now drawn tight. You sure? His voice carried a mix of annoyance and concern. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Something was off. The air felt colder, thicker, and a strange pressure was building in my chest. I glanced at the others, but none of them seemed to notice the change. They were too busy navigating the path, unaware of the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The farther we walked, the more the forest seemed to close in around us. The shadows grew longer, and the sound of the river grew more oppressive. It wasn't the peaceful murmur I had expected. Instead, the current seemed to carry an unsettling weight, as if the water itself was alive, breathing with a rhythm that didn't quite match ours. I caught myself looking over my shoulder more frequently now. It wasn't just a rustle anymore. It was something else. A sensation. A presence. And then there was the smell. At first, it was faint, like the damp earth after rain. But it quickly grew stronger, more pungent. Something rotting, something decaying. It clung to the air, thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. Anyone else smell that? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. No one responded immediately. They were too busy pushing forward, too focused on reaching the next checkpoint. Mark shot me a quick glance, but he didn't say anything. No one else seemed to notice the smell. I felt a pang of doubt. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But the smell, God, it was so real, so overwhelming. It made my stomach churn. And then, as if on cue, the rustling came again. This time, it was louder, closer, more deliberate. Seriously, guys, I said, my voice rising, we're not alone. Mark stopped in his tracks and turned to face me. Calm down, all right? You're just jumpy. It's the woods. It gets to people. But it wasn't just the woods. I could feel it. Something was wrong. And then it happened. The first shadow passed across the path ahead of us. It was quick, too quick to be a person. The shape was tall and wrong. Not human, not animal, but something in between. The shadows shifted, stretching unnaturally long, bending in a way that shadows shouldn't. My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammering in my chest. I took a step back, my eyes locked on the moving dark shape. Did you see that? Mark glanced up, then froze. I don't. Before he could finish his sentence, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, began echoing through the trees. But these weren't just any footsteps. They weren't the sounds of anyone walking with us. No, these steps were wrong. There was something too heavy, too calculated about them. I felt my pulse race as the others turned to look, now visibly unsettled. The air had turned cold, and the silence between the steps felt deafening. It wasn't just the forest now. The forest itself was holding its breath. And somewhere in the distance, the river rushed on as if nothing was amiss. But I knew something had changed. And it wasn't just the woods. We were no longer alone. The footsteps continued. Slow. Measured. Every step felt like it was closing in on us, but there was no one there. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, a thudding rhythm that made it harder to focus. Every part of me screamed to run, but my feet were frozen to the ground, rooted in place by something I couldn't explain. Mark was the first to break the silence. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "It's probably just a trick of the light. A deer or a tree branch. Whatever." He took a step forward, the others following behind, though they moved with less certainty than before. I stayed back, watching the shadows. They seemed to be stretching further now, longer than they should be, stretching toward us like something that was hunting. "Maybe we should stop for the night," Claire, one of the quieter members of our group, suggested. She sounded almost nervous. "It's getting late, and we haven't found the campsite yet." Her words hung in the air, but no one answered immediately. The suggestion seemed too sensible, too practical, yet there was something in her tone, something that made me feel the weight of her fear more than my own. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A figure. Barely visible at first, standing at the river's edge. Just outside the reach of the light, barely a shadow among shadows. But I could see it clearly. Tall, thin, almost skeletal in form. The longer I looked, the more distinct it became. A shape that shouldn't have been standing there. I couldn't make out its face, if it had one at all, but the feeling it gave off was suffocating, like a cold, invisible hand closing around my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words stuck. My throat was dry, my voice strangled by a fear I couldn't explain. I wanted to shout, to warn them, but I couldn't make a sound. Claire was the first to notice me staring. "What's wrong?" she asked, turning her gaze in the direction I was looking. I couldn't look away. There's someone standing by the river." The others turned, following my gaze, but the figure was gone. "What are you talking about?" "There's nothing there," Mark said, his voice tinged with annoyance. He stepped forward, and I saw the way his body language shifted, like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "I saw it," I insisted, my voice shaking now. "I swear to you, I saw someone standing there." Nobody spoke for a moment. The sound of the river flowing seemed louder, more forceful, as if it was trying to drown out the silence between us. Mark shook his head, his eyes narrowing as if he was questioning my sanity. "You're seeing things," he muttered. "We've been on the trail for hours. You're just tired." "It's nothing." But I knew what I saw. I felt it in my gut, the certainty that whatever that thing was, it hadn't been a trick of the mind. It had been real. But as I turned around to speak again, the air felt wrong. Cold, oppressive. And then there was that smell. That awful, decaying stench. "Do you smell that?" Claire asked, her voice trembling now. I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The smell was stronger, sharper now. Like something was rotting just out of sight. It was everywhere, cloying, thick, like it had seeped into the very earth beneath us. Without another word, I turned to face the others. We need to go. Now. Mark looked at me, then at the others, his face hardening. All right, we'll head back to the camp. But let's not freak out over nothing. We started walking, but the further we moved, the more the forest seemed to close in around us. The shadows felt deeper now, stretching and shifting with every step. The rustling in the trees grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel something, or someone, moving just beyond the edge of my vision. And then, the whispering started. It was soft at first, a distant murmur that I thought might be the wind. But then it grew louder, more distinct, and I realized with a growing sense of horror that it wasn't the wind at all. It was voices. Faint, hurried whispers, like someone calling from just beyond the trees. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the urgency in them, the desperation. It sounded like they were warning us. Or pleading. Do you hear that? I whispered, but no one seemed to notice. They were all walking ahead, their eyes focused on the ground. No one heard the voices, or at least, they weren't acknowledging it. Maybe they thought it was just another trick of the mind. But I knew what I heard. I had heard them. And then, the voices grew clearer. A name. My name. I froze in my tracks. Jonah, a voice whispered. Jonah, come closer. It was soft, breathy, and familiar, like a memory trying to break through the fog. I turned, scanning the woods around me, my pulse quickening. But all I saw were trees. Tall, looming trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. Did you hear that? I asked, now frantic. But no one seemed to respond. They just kept walking, as if nothing had changed. Jonah, the voice repeated. It was getting closer. It was here. And in that moment, I realized something. We weren't just lost in the woods. We were being drawn into something. Something that wanted us here. Something that had been waiting. I had to tell them. We had to leave. But as I took a step forward to warn them, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The earth trembled, as if the very forest was alive and aware. And then, from the riverbank, a shape emerged. Something tall, slender, its limbs impossibly long, moving in a way that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just the shadows anymore. It was something more. Something that wasn't human. Run! I shouted, my voice hoarse with fear. But they didn't hear me. They couldn't. And the darkness closed in around us. The air was thick now, heavy with an almost tangible sense of dread. The whispers had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting, watching. And then a figure from the riverbank stepped forward again, its presence more solid now, more real. I could feel its eyes on me, but I couldn't see them. It was like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My legs felt like lead, unwilling to move, but I had to act. Run! I screamed again, but this time the words were caught in my throat. It wasn't just the creature I feared, it was the stillness of everything around us. The others were already moving now, but not with the same urgency, not with the same terror. They were confused, uncertain. Jonah, what the hell is going on? Mark yelled, his voice laced with frustration and fear. What did you see? There's something out there. I couldn't find the words to explain. It wasn't just a creature, it wasn't just a shadow, it was the very forest itself that seemed to be alive, shifting, bending with some sinister purpose. I turned to look at the others. Claire was close behind me, her eyes wide with fear, her steps quick and unsteady. But it wasn't enough. The shadows around us weren't just moving, they were closing in, slipping in between the trees, weaving in and out of our line of sight. A sound, faint at first, but growing louder, began to fill the air. It was like the crackling of dry leaves, the scraping of branches across the earth, and then footsteps. But not just any footsteps. These were soft, almost silent, but they were everywhere. All around us. I looked back. There was nothing behind me, nothing visible. But I could feel it. The sensation of being surrounded, like invisible hands were reaching for me from every direction. Mark's voice broke through my panic. We need to keep moving. This is crazy. There's nothing here. His words were cut off by a sharp crack, like a branch snapping in half. I whipped around, my heart racing. The noise came from the direction of the river where the figure had been. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it moving, the sound of its feet dragging through the leaves, each step slow and deliberate, drawing closer and closer. And then it spoke. The voice was low, like a rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Leave, now, or join us. I stumbled back, my legs buckling beneath me as I tried to keep my footing. The others stopped in their tracks, their faces pale with fear. But they didn't seem to hear the voice. Or at least, they didn't react to it the way I did. It was like they were still caught in that fragile moment between disbelief and terror, struggling to make sense of what was happening. I heard it, I whispered, my throat dry, my voice barely audible. It spoke. It said. Before I could finish, Claire grabbed my arm. Jonah, stop. You're scaring yourself. We're all scared, but you're starting to lose it. We need to keep going. Just keep moving. I could see it in her eyes. She was afraid, but she didn't want to admit it. None of them did. They were trying to push through, trying to convince themselves that this was just a trick of the mind, a bad feeling that would pass once they got out of the woods. But it wasn't going to pass. I felt it again. That strange pressure on my chest, the sense that something was wrong. The forest was alive with sounds now, scraping, shifting, dragging. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and that feeling of being watched never left. It was like the trees themselves were closing in around us, pushing us towards some unseen edge, an inevitable confrontation. Suddenly, there was a snap, this time, closer than before. Too close. I spun around, and for the briefest of moments, I saw it. A figure, just beyond the trees, its long limbs moving in a way that made no sense, twisting unnaturally. It was taller than any human should be, with fingers that were far too long. Its face was obscured by darkness, but its shape was unmistakable. It wasn't human. Move. I shouted, grabbing Claire's arm and pulling her along, though I didn't know where we were going. It didn't matter. We had to get out. We had to leave. But the forest was closing in faster now. The trees seemed to lean toward us, their branches shifting, twisting like serpents. The path that had been so clear before now seemed to vanish, swallowed up by the ever-expanding shadows. Mark was ahead of us now, his face pale, his eyes wild with fear. "Where do we go?" he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "We can't outrun it. We can't hide from it." I didn't know the answer. The forest wasn't just a place now, It was a maze, a trap designed to keep us here. Every step we took felt like it was leading us deeper into its grip, further away from the safety we'd once hoped for. The rustling grew louder, the voices growing clearer. This time, they weren't just whispers. They were calling our names, chanting them over and over, echoing through the trees. And then the figure was there, standing in front of us, blocking the path. It was tall, impossibly tall, its face hidden in the darkness. But I could feel its eyes, cold, unblinking. The air around it was heavier now, pressing down, thick with the scent of decay. I could hear the sound of its breath, ragged and deep, like something ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment. And then it spoke again. You should not have come. The ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble, as if the earth itself was rejecting us, trying to force us to leave. But we couldn't. There was nowhere to go. We were trapped. I didn't know if I could survive this. If any of us could. But one thing was clear, we were no longer in control. The forest had us. And whatever it was that lurked in its depths wasn't going to let us go. We stood there, frozen. The figure in front of us, towering and unmoving, filled the clearing with a terrifying stillness. Its presence was overwhelming, suffocating, and the darkness around it seemed to grow even deeper. The air felt thick with something ancient, something far older than any of us. It didn't move, but I could feel its attention on us, its gaze pressing into my skin like invisible fingers. The voice that had spoken earlier echoed in my mind, a low, rasping whisper that had felt like it was meant just for me. You should not have come. I tried to breathe, but the air was too heavy. My chest felt tight, and the panic was rising, threatening to overwhelm me. But I couldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off the figure. What is it? Mark whispered, his voice trembling, but I could hear the disbelief in it. He was still trying to convince himself that this was some trick, some hallucination. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, my mind racing. I could hear the others behind me, but they were silent too, perhaps waiting for me to say something, anything that would make sense of this madness. Then, the figure moved. Slowly, with an unnatural fluidity, it bent forward, its long limbs stretching like they didn't belong in this world. I couldn't take my eyes off it, though every part of me screamed to look away. And then, the most terrifying part, its face. At first, I thought I saw nothing but darkness, a void where its face should have been. But then, it shifted. The shadows that had swallowed its features now swirled, revealing something wrong. The face was almost human, but twisted. Its skin stretched too thin, its eyes too wide. They were black, hollow pits, empty, unblinking. The lips, if they could be called that, were cracked, drawn back in a grin that made my stomach turn. The figure's voice, low, guttural, slithered out of the darkness. You are trespassing in my domain. The words felt like they were clawing at my soul, as though they were reaching for something deep inside of me, pulling at memories I didn't want to remember. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, to fight, but my legs were heavy, like they were made of stone. The others were still there, but I could hear their breathing now, shallow, quick. Claire was closest to me, her hand clutching mine, but she was trembling so badly I thought she might collapse. What does it want? Mark demanded, his voice sharp with fear. His bravado was gone now, replaced by desperation. The figure didn't answer immediately. It simply stared, its gaze boring into me, and I felt it, something inside me that shifted, like the ground beneath my feet. Something was being uncovered. something I didn't want to remember. And then, finally, the figure spoke again, but this time it wasn't addressing any of us. It was speaking to something else, something that wasn't there, not in the clearing, but somewhere in the distance. "Bring them closer," it hissed. The voice was like 1,000 whispers, all merging into one dark, rasping command. "They will see. They will know." I didn't understand at first, but then the ground beneath me trembled again. The air grew colder, and I heard it, the sound of something dragging through the underbrush, something moving through the trees, something that wasn't human. I turned my head, but I couldn't see it. Not clearly. It was moving too fast, too erratically, and it made no sound until it was too late. Out of the shadows, something burst into view. It was massive, bigger than anything natural, with limbs that were far too long, twisting and contorting as it emerged. Its body was a grotesque mishmash of shapes, something like a human, but distorted, deformed. The thing didn't have a face, just a smooth, pale surface where its features should have been, like a mannequin with no expression. And then it opened its mouth. Not with lips, but with jagged, uneven lines, revealing rows of teeth that weren't teeth at all. They were like shards of glass, sharp and glittering in the dark. It wasn't just one of them. There were many, and they were all moving toward us, drawn by some force I couldn't comprehend. "Run!" I finally shouted, my voice cracking, but it wasn't a command, it was a plea. A desperate cry. But it was too late. The creature lunged, its movements swift, unnatural, and before I could even register what was happening, it was on us. I grabbed Claire, pulling her as hard as I could, but the others were already ahead of us, rushing toward the trees, their feet pounding the earth in a desperate attempt to escape. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I could only hear the sound of the thing behind us, its body scraping against the trees, dragging itself forward in pursuit. My breath was ragged, every inhale a struggle. The forest had become a blur, trees whipping past, their shadows bending in ways that made no sense. The sound of the thing behind us grew louder, its breathing heavy, uneven. It wasn't just chasing us. It was hunting us. We reached a clearing, a moment of fleeting safety, but then the shadows in the corners of the forest shifted again. The others were still running, but I was falling behind now. "Jonah!" Mark shouted. "Come on!" But I couldn't move fast enough. I could feel the ground trembling beneath me, feel the thing closing in, feel its presence growing larger and larger in my mind. Then, from behind me, a cold, skeletal hand reached out. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the night. And then, everything went black. I woke up, gasping for air, my chest heaving as though I had just run a marathon. But the air around me wasn't right. It was too still, too quiet. The familiar scent of damp earth was gone, replaced by something metallic, like rust, and something more insidious, decay. I could feel the ground beneath me, but it was uneven, not the soft earth of the forest floor. I was lying on something cold, hard, unnatural. I tried to move, but my limbs were heavy, my body stiff, like it had been dragged across the ground for miles. Slowly, I pushed myself up, blinking against the darkness that surrounded me. Where was I? I looked around, and for a moment, I thought I was still in the forest. But there were no trees here. No sky. The air smelled like iron and rot, and the only sound I could hear was my own breath. I tried to stand, but the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The walls, or what I thought were walls, were made of something that wasn't wood, stone, or earth. They were smooth, unnaturally smooth, like a surface that wasn't meant to be touched. There were no windows, no doors, nothing to tell me where I was or how I had gotten there. Claire? Mark? My voice cracked as I called out, but the words felt hollow, swallowed by the emptiness around me. My heart raced, and I felt the familiar chill creep up my spine, the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me, waiting. I staggered forward, my head spinning, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The walls around me seemed to pulse, like they were alive, but I couldn't tell if that was just my mind playing tricks on me. I had to find the others. I had to know if they were okay, if they had made it out of the forest. Then I heard it. A faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind or my imagination. But then it came again, closer this time, insistent, like a voice that was just out of reach. Jonah. I froze. I knew that voice. But how? How could it be? The walls seemed to close in, the space around me narrowing, growing tighter. I could feel my breath quicken, my pulse pounding in my ears. My mind was screaming at me to move, but my feet wouldn't obey. I turned around, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was nothing, no one. And then, the walls began to shift. They moved, not like solid surfaces, but like living things, breathing and stretching. The space around me was warping, bending, like reality itself was fracturing. The walls twisted and buckled, and I felt the floor beneath me give way. I reached out, desperate to steady myself, but the ground was slipping away, and with it, my sense of direction, my sense of safety. It was like the world was unraveling around me, tearing apart at the seams. I stumbled forward, my hands reaching for something, anything to hold on to. And then, light. A single, flickering light appeared in the distance, casting a pale, sickly glow across the room. It was coming from a small opening in the wall, a crack that hadn't been there before. Without thinking, I moved toward it, drawn to the light like a moth to a flame. The closer I got, the more the walls around me seemed to writhe and shift, as though they were trying to keep me from reaching it. And then, just as I was about to touch the crack, the light disappeared. The walls seemed to collapse in on themselves, and I was plunged back into darkness. Jonah. It was closer now. The voice, no, the voices were all around me. There were more than one. They weren't just whispering, they were calling my name, chanting it in unison. The sound was deafening, filling my mind with an overwhelming sense of dread. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside my head, burrowing into my thoughts, and then I saw it. The face. It wasn't just a figure from the forest anymore. It had changed. Twisted. It was the same, but it was different. The face was an amalgamation of every fear, every horror I had ever imagined. It was not one face, but many, each one shifting, blending into the next. Eyes that didn't blink, mouths that didn't speak, but the expressions were clear: anger, hunger, pain. It was closer now, standing right in front of me, its cold breath ghosting over my skin. I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed, my mind screaming, but there was nothing I could do. Join us, the voice whispered, and it was like the very air around me trembled with the weight of the words. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't want to know. The figure reached out, its hand long and twisted, the fingers ending in sharp, black claws. I could feel its coldness, its darkness, wrapping around me, pulling me closer. It was suffocating, drowning me in its presence. And then, I felt it, my own fear. It wasn't just the fear of what was happening now, it was something deeper, something buried inside me. A memory, long forgotten, but now rising to the surface. The forest. The river. The creature. It wasn't the first time I had seen it. It wasn't the first time it had found me. I had been here before. I had been here, and I had escaped. But this time, there was no way out. This time, it was different. I wasn't sure what happened next. My mind fractured, reality splintered, and everything went dark again. I don't know if I woke up again after that, or if I had simply slipped into madness. All I know is that when I opened my eyes once more, I was back in the forest. But it was not the same forest. It was darker, twisted, unnatural. The trees loomed overhead like dark sentinels, their branches reaching out like claws. And the whispers were back. But this time, they weren't just whispers. They were promises. I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped through the door. It wasn't like the feeling of stepping into an unfamiliar place. It was more like the air had changed, the kind of unease that makes your skin prickle, like when you know you're being watched but can't see anyone around. At first, I thought it was just the exhaustion. After a long day of work, my mind was tired, but something inside me wouldn't let go of the strange sensation. I'd been living in this apartment for months. The faded wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, the old wooden furniture that was more functional than pretty. It was nothing special, but it was home. Yet today, something had shifted. I walked through the living room, my footsteps muffled against the worn carpet, and entered the hallway. The door to my bedroom was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see a sliver of the dimly lit room. That's when I stopped. I don't know why, maybe it was the silence, maybe it was just a gut feeling, but I felt a knot form in my stomach. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. At first glance, everything seemed normal, except it wasn't. The bed, the dresser, my bookshelves, the pile of clothes I had left on the floor, everything was gone. Just gone. There was nothing. No sign of anything that had ever been there. No traces of dust, no imprints on the floor where the furniture had stood. I walked in, hesitant. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but when I opened them again, nothing had changed. The walls were bare, the floor clean, too clean. My breath hitched, and I glanced around. I couldn't tell if the silence was calming or suffocating. The house seemed too still. I stepped back into the hallway, trying to reason with myself. It had to be a mistake. Maybe I had forgotten to pick up something, or I was so tired that I had imagined it. I turned to leave, but that's when I noticed the door. It was open. It hadn't been when I came in. I didn't know how I hadn't heard it open, how I hadn't noticed it. But now, it was standing wide open, as if inviting me in. I felt the hairs on my neck rise as I stepped closer, each footstep making the room feel colder, emptier. My heart beat in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Deeply wrong. I hesitated, but the compulsion to look, to understand, was stronger than my fear. I pushed the door all the way open. And the room inside, it was just as empty. No bed. No dresser. Nothing. Only the walls and the floor, stripped bare. I turned and left quickly, heading back to the living room, but there was no relief. The apartment seemed smaller now, like the walls were closing in. The air felt thick, dense. I couldn't breathe properly. I reached for my phone, thinking maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. But when I unlocked it, my screen froze. It was stuck on one picture, a picture from months ago. A photo of the apartment, taken from this very spot, the living room in the background, my old chair sitting by the window. But something was wrong with the photo. The room was empty. I stared at the screen, my fingers numb against the glass. No, that couldn't be right. I clicked on the picture, trying to zoom in, trying to see something different, but it stayed the same. An empty room. Empty walls. A distorted image that didn't match the apartment I knew. I dropped the phone on the couch and stood there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to understand what was happening. I tried to rationalize it, but nothing made sense. The front door creaked open behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The door stood wide open. I hadn't left it like that. For the first time, the weight of the silence seemed unbearable. The pressure in my chest was too much. My thoughts, spiraling faster than I could catch them, told me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen, glued to the spot. And that's when I saw it. A small mark on the floor. Just a tiny scrape, like something had been dragged across it. I knelt down, staring at it. There was no reason for it to be there. Not for me. I hadn't moved anything. I hadn't dragged anything. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. The mark, whatever it was leading toward the hallway again. I swallowed, my throat dry, and stood up, but before I could take a step, the air seemed to change again. It was heavier now, thick with something I couldn't place, a strange smell, sharp and metallic. My heartbeat was the only sound in my ears. And then, out of nowhere, I heard a knock. A knock at the door. Not the front door. The bedroom door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There was no way I was hearing this right. But then it came again. Another knock. "Hello?" I said, voice trembling, but it didn't sound like me. No answer. I tried to move toward the door, my legs like lead, but I couldn't get myself to move. Another knock. Louder this time. I glanced toward the kitchen, my mind racing, but there was no escape. Nothing had changed. Nothing had ever changed. It had all just disappeared. But as I took a step toward the door, a voice, soft but distinct, whispered from behind it. "Come back." I stumbled back, heart racing, pulse in my ears. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wasn't alone. Something was here with me. But what? I couldn't move. My body was frozen, caught between the urge to flee and the unbearable curiosity to know what was behind that door. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get out of the apartment, but my feet wouldn't obey. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake from. The voice. It was so faint, like a breath brushing against my ear. But it was there. "Come back." The words lingered in the still air, and for a moment, I thought I might be imagining it. But the knocking continued, louder now, each tap vibrating through my chest. It was coming from the bedroom door. No one was there. There couldn't be anyone. My mind was spinning. I had to check. I had to understand what was happening. I took a step forward, my pulse hammering in my ears, my hands trembling. The hallway stretched out before me like a tunnel of darkness, the shadows cast by the dim light in the living room creating long, twisted shapes on the floor. I felt something in the air, heavy, suffocating, as if the apartment itself was closing in on me. I reached the bedroom door. The handle was cold, slick under my palm. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, each breath a struggle. The knocking had stopped. There was silence again. But it wasn't comforting, it was oppressive, like the silence was waiting, watching, listening. I turned the knob. The door creaked open slowly, just a crack, as if something was holding it back from the other side. I pushed harder, the door giving way to reveal nothing. The room was just as empty as before. Empty walls. Empty floor. Empty air. Nothing. No furniture, no signs of anything that had been there. It was as if the entire room had been erased from existence. But that's when I saw it. A single piece of paper lying on the floor in the middle of the room. It looked so out of place, like it had been deliberately placed there. I stepped inside, my breath coming in short gasps, my feet hesitant on the floorboards that creaked under my weight. The paper was folded neatly, almost too neatly. I bent down and picked it up, hands shaking. The paper was blank. No words, no marks. Just an empty sheet. I turned it over, expecting to find something hidden on the other side. But there was nothing. Just the same blank surface. My stomach twisted, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I looked around the room again, feeling the oppressive weight of the emptiness. The silence felt like it was pressing against me, suffocating me. I had to get out. I had to leave. But as I turned to walk back toward the door, I felt something. Something cold, like a chill running down my spine. A presence. It wasn't a sound, but the feeling of being watched. No, not watched, but observed, as if something was silently tracking my every move. I whipped around, but there was nothing. The door was still wide open. The room still empty. But I knew, deep down, that something was there. Watching me. Waiting. I couldn't stay in here. I couldn't breathe in this room anymore. I needed to leave. I needed to escape whatever this was. I stepped back toward the door, but then I froze. There, at the edge of the room, by the far wall, something had changed. The floorboards were scratched, as if something heavy had been dragged across them. And there, in the corner, a figure. A silhouette. Just standing there. I could barely make out its shape in the dim light, but I knew it wasn't human. The figure was tall, too tall, and its edges were distorted, like a shadow that had taken on form, but not quite a solid one. It moved, just slightly, and my heart stopped. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't look away. The figure didn't move much, but it was there. It was real. It was waiting. And then, without warning, the figure took a step toward me. I finally managed to turn, stumbling back into the hallway, my feet sliding on the floor. I had to get out. I had to get away. But as I ran, the air around me thickened again, the pressure unbearable. I reached the front door. It was wide open. And something was waiting outside. A shadow stretched across the threshold, as if whatever it was outside had been there the whole time, just waiting for me to open the door. I hesitated, hand on the knob. I didn't want to open it. But if I didn't know how long I could stay in this apartment, trapped by the silence, by the fear. A voice whispered in my ear again, so close now that it felt like it was coming from inside my head. Come back. It's not over. I pushed the door open, stepping out into the hallway, but the world outside didn't feel real anymore. It felt like a dream, warped and distorted. The apartment had somehow stretched, twisted into something else, something wrong. And the knocking started again. This time, it was coming from everywhere. The walls. The ceiling. The floor. Come back. I couldn't breathe. I ran. But no matter how far I went, I could still hear it. The knocking. And the voice. Come back. I didn't know where I was going. The hallway stretched out before me, but it felt like it never ended. The walls seemed to close in with each step, the air thick with a heaviness that made it harder to breathe. The knocking was still there, echoing around me, relentless. It wasn't just coming from the walls anymore. It was inside my head. My own heartbeat seemed to join in, every pulse reverberating through my body like a drum. Come back. The voice had grown louder, more insistent, more familiar. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was speaking to me, directly to me, as if it knew my every thought. I turned sharply, my back pressed against the wall, eyes darting around the empty space. The apartment, the hallway, nothing seemed to make sense anymore. The angles of the walls were wrong, the shadows were too long. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. And yet, the more I looked at it, the more everything seemed off. I could see the faint outlines of things, barely visible, but they weren't real. They flickered in and out of existence, like ghosts of something that had once been. I had to escape. I had to. The floor shifted beneath my feet. I stumbled, my body jerking forward as if the floor had suddenly given way. I caught myself, breathing heavily, heart racing. The knocking grew louder, sharper, until it was the only sound in the world. I couldn't focus on anything else. The walls seemed to vibrate with it. Come back. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find the door. The front door. The way out. I turned, eyes searching desperately for it, but the hallway had changed again. The door wasn't where it had been. The walls were closing in, the space shrinking around me like the apartment was alive, bending, twisting, trying to swallow me whole. My pulse quickened as I walked, stumbled, down the hall. The air was suffocating, and each step felt heavier than the last. And then, I saw it. The door. It was standing open, just like before, but now there was a figure in the doorway. A silhouette, dark and silent, blocking the light from outside. I couldn't make out the details, but I could feel it watching me. Waiting. I didn't want to go near it. I wanted to turn and run in the other direction to escape this nightmare that was closing in on me. But I couldn't move. The door, the figure, it pulled me in like a magnetic force, irresistible and terrifying. Come back. The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was inside me, all around me, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. I had to do something. I grabbed the doorframe, my fingers digging into the wood, trying to steady myself. I stared at the figure, trying to find some shred of logic, some explanation, but there was nothing. It was just a shadow, a presence that felt as wrong as everything else in the apartment. My chest tightened, the air growing colder, and I realized with a sickening jolt that I wasn't alone anymore. The room behind the figure was darker than it should have been. A deep, unnatural blackness, as if the light had been drained away, leaving only emptiness. I stepped closer, drawn to it, my feet moving before I could stop them. And then, the figure moved. Slowly. Shifting forward, its form bending unnaturally as if it wasn't made of flesh and bone, but of shadows and whispers. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, probing, searching. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, my legs weak beneath me. The knocking continued, but now it was louder, more frantic. Come back. I was losing control. My breath was ragged, my thoughts scattered. Everything was crumbling. I was falling into a hole of madness, and there was no way out. The figure reached out. Long, skeletal fingers stretched toward me, and I couldn't move. My mind screamed for me to run, to get away, but I was paralyzed by fear. The air around me was thick with it, suffocating me, pressing down on my chest. And then, the door slammed shut. The sound was deafening, a final, resounding blow that echoed through the apartment. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It was suffocating. I stood there, my hands shaking, my body frozen in place. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew I couldn't stay in this apartment any longer. I had to leave. I had to find a way out before whatever this thing was consumed me. I ran, but the hallway had changed again. The walls were different now. There were marks, scratches, deep gouges in the plaster, like something had been clawing at them. The floor creaked beneath my feet, each step echoing in the hollow space. The knocking had stopped, but the silence was just as maddening. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. The door. The front door. It had to be there. It had to. But as I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door wasn't there. The hallway stretched out, endless and empty. I was trapped. And that's when I heard it. The whisper. Come back. The whisper echoed in my mind, growing louder and more insistent with every passing second. My pulse pounded in my ears, my breath shallow and uneven. I stood frozen, paralyzed by the voice that called to me, as if it were the only thing that mattered anymore. Come back. I could feel the weight of the words pressing down on me. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't a command, no, it was an invitation. An invitation to step back into that darkness, to surrender myself to whatever lay beyond the threshold of this nightmarish place. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake up. But I was stuck, my feet planted firmly on the floor, the air thick around me, making each movement feel like a struggle against something invisible. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest, and the hallway twisted. The walls seemed to shift and bend, the ceiling tilting, as if the very space around me was warping to prevent my escape. I could hear the walls groan, creak under the pressure. The apartment felt alive, as though it were responding to my fear. The knocking had returned, louder than ever, frantic, erratic. Each thud was like a heartbeat, pounding, relentless, as if something was trying to break through from the other side. And then, the whisper again. Come back. I had to move. I didn't know how, but I had to keep moving. My fingers twitched at my sides, my body instinctively jerking toward the door that wasn't there. There had to be an exit. There had to be a way out. My feet found the floor beneath me again, and I stumbled down the hallway, my mind racing, but my eyes barely able to focus. The apartment was no longer just a place. No, it had become something else, something hostile, something that wanted me to stay, to remain trapped in its claustrophobic grasp. The rooms seemed endless. I couldn't remember how many turns I had made, how many walls I had passed. It felt like the apartment was folding in on itself, growing larger and smaller at the same time. And then a door appeared. It wasn't the front door. It wasn't even a door I recognized, but it was there, standing at the end of the hallway, bathed in an unnatural glow. I approached it, slowly at first, but the closer I got, the faster my heart raced. The knocking was almost deafening now, a rhythmic pounding that felt like it was coming from inside my skull. "Come back." I could hear the voice, clear as day, as if it was right behind me, whispering in my ear. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Something was drawing me in, pulling me toward that door. I reached for the handle. My hand hovered over it, trembling. What was waiting for me on the other side? What would happen if I opened it? The door swung open before I could touch it. A wave of cold air rushed out, sharp and biting, almost as if the room beyond was frozen. I peered inside, my breath fogging the air. It was too dark to see clearly, but I could make out the outline of something standing in the middle of the room. A figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body thin and elongated, casting a long shadow on the wall. The room beyond was so dark that I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence. I could feel it watching me. I took a step back, my legs trembling beneath me, but the door slammed shut before I could turn away. I spun around, panic rising in my chest, and found myself facing another door. It was different, but familiar, as if I had been here before. I opened it. Another figure stood inside, in the same position as the first. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The knocking was deafening now, a relentless hammering that seemed to come from every direction, surrounding me, drowning me in noise. "Come back." The door slammed again. I wasn't sure what was happening anymore. Each door, each figure, it was all a blur, a cycle I couldn't escape. Every time I opened one, there was another, just like the last. The knocking never stopped. The whisper never stopped. It was happening again. The walls were shifting, changing, collapsing on me. The apartment was a maze, a trap, a labyrinth of my own making. I couldn't find my way out. I was losing my mind. "Come back." I turned, and there it was again, another figure, another doorway, waiting for me. And then it hit me. I wasn't trying to escape anymore. I was trying to outrun myself. I had been here before. I had always been here. The walls, the rooms, the doors, they weren't the problem. The problem was me. The fear, the madness, it was all in my head, growing, festering, turning the apartment into a prison of my own making. And every time I opened another door, every time I took a step forward, I was only moving deeper into the trap. I couldn't escape. Not from this place. Not from this mind. And that was the real horror. Because no matter how far I ran, no matter how many doors I opened, I would always end up back here. I had already returned. I had never left. I was never going to leave. It took me a moment to realize that I wasn't alone anymore. The silence had returned, so thick it felt suffocating. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, as if it too had become part of the nightmare. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. What I had just realized. I hadn't left. I hadn't escaped. The whispering voice, the figures, the knocking, it had all been a part of it. The apartment, this place, was no longer just a setting. It had become me. My thoughts, my fears, they were shaping everything around me. I wasn't running from it. I was running from myself. And no matter how many doors I opened, how many hallways I crossed, I would always return to the same place, the same endless loop. The floor beneath me felt soft, almost like it was shifting. I could feel the walls tightening, closing in. The air was thick with the smell of dust, of decay, like this place had been abandoned for years, even though I had only been here for what felt like a few hours. And then it hit me, the subtle change that had been creeping up on me for what felt like an eternity. The apartment was starting to feel familiar. I could feel it deep in my chest, in the way the space seemed to shift, as if it recognized me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the walls, it was all a whisper, a recognition. It knew who I was. It knew me better than I knew myself. I took a hesitant step forward, my body moving against my will, like I was being drawn deeper into its grasp. The hallway stretched out before me, longer than it had ever seemed before. The doors, the walls, they were shifting, becoming something else, something that almost made sense. The dim light, the cold drafts, they felt like home now. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The door. The same door that had haunted me through this entire maze. But this time, there was something different about it. A faint glow flickered from underneath, like it was waiting for me to open it again. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I hesitated. I knew, somewhere deep inside, that whatever lay beyond that door would be the end of this madness. It would either make everything stop, or it would consume me entirely. I reached for the handle. It was ice cold against my skin, the metal sending a shock through my body as I twisted it open. The moment the door swung wide, I stepped inside. But there was nothing there. Nothing but an empty room, completely barren, not even a single shadow to greet me. The walls were bare, the floor smooth and untouched. No figures. No knocking. No whispers. Just silence. It felt wrong. It felt like a trap. I backed away slowly, my heart racing, until my back hit the doorframe. I had come this far, but something in my gut told me I was missing something. There had to be more to this. Something wasn't right. And then it happened. The door slammed shut behind me, and I whirled around to find it locked. The knob wouldn't turn, no matter how hard I twisted. Panic surged through me, my breathing coming in quick gasps. I turned back to face the room, and it was then that I saw it, the thing I hadn't noticed before. The mirror. It was a tall, full-length mirror, standing alone in the center of the room. But it wasn't reflecting the emptiness around me. No, it was reflecting me. Or, rather, it was reflecting a version of me that didn't quite match who I was. The figure in the mirror stood there, staring back at me, but its expression was wrong. It was a twisted mockery of myself, its face contorted in a way that sent shivers crawling down my spine. Its eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring straight through me as if it knew everything about me. I reached out instinctively, and the mirror rippled like water under my touch. A cold, slick sensation ran through my fingers, but when I withdrew my hand, the reflection didn't change. It was still there, watching. I took a step back, my pulse racing. My mind was screaming for me to escape, but I couldn't. I was trapped. And the worst part was, I knew, deep down, that the mirror was a reflection of me. It wasn't a different version. It was me, twisted by fear, by everything I had endured since I first entered this apartment. But it wasn't just a reflection that terrified me, it was what it was trying to tell me. There was no escape. I reached for the mirror again, my breath shallow, as the figure in the glass mirrored my every movement. But as I touched the surface, the reflection didn't follow me. It grinned. And then the voice came again, soft and insistent. Come back. The room shifted once more, the edges of reality warping. The apartment was no longer just a place. It was part of me. And I was part of it. There was no running. No escaping. There was only returning. And I knew now that I would never leave. It was early morning when I first noticed the footprints. I had woken up to the sharp cold creeping into my bones, the familiar silence of my small cabin nestled in the woods. The kind of silence that presses in on you, settling into your thoughts, making you feel isolated, as though the world outside has forgotten you. I always liked it that way, being alone, surrounded by nothing but nature and the stillness of the landscape. But this morning, something was different. When I looked outside, my heart skipped a beat. The yard, usually covered in untouched white, was now littered with footprints, large, deep indentations in the snow, leading right up to my doorstep. I couldn't have hurt anyone. I hadn't seen a car pass for days. Who could it have been? I stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to make sense of it. It was so quiet. The only sound was the wind swirling through the trees. But those footprints, they hadn't been there yesterday. I knew it. I had walked across this same yard, no sign of anything unusual. The footsteps were clear, distinct, almost too perfect. One by one, they seemed to lead directly toward my door, and they were so fresh. The snow was still pristine except for those tracks. I took a step back from the window, feeling an unfamiliar coldness settle in my chest. There was something unsettling about the way they appeared so suddenly, so perfectly placed. It wasn't just the fact that someone had been out there. It was how close they had come. The tracks stopped right at the foot of the porch, as if the person had been standing there, watching. I forced myself to move, pulling away from the window, retreating to the warmth of my kitchen. My hands were shaking as I tried to make coffee, the boiling water hissing in the pot. It felt like I couldn't catch my breath. What was I supposed to think? It had to be a hiker or someone passing through, I told myself. But the closer I looked, the more the questions piled up. Who would come all the way out here? I didn't dare go outside yet. The silence seemed to have grown heavier, more suffocating. It was the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle, the kind that makes you feel watched even when you know there's no one there. My mind spun with questions I couldn't answer. What if the footprints weren't just a coincidence? What if someone, or something, had been lurking in the woods? The air in the cabin felt thicker as I sat there, sipping my coffee, staring out the window, eyes fixated on the trail. It was impossible to ignore them. When I finally decided to step outside, I felt a deep unease in my gut. The snow crunched under my boots, the only sound in the stillness. I reached the porch and looked down, noticing something strange. The tracks had changed. They weren't exactly the same as they had been this morning. They had been moving, shifting, closer, but they hadn't stopped at the door anymore. They had continued further around the cabin, toward the back. I followed them, my feet dragging through the snow. My heart pounded in my chest. The tracks had a pattern now, and the closer I got to the back of the house, the more I realized they weren't just random. They had a strange rhythm, a purpose to them. Almost like they were leading me somewhere. I stopped at the back door, my breath fogging in the cold air. The footprints ended right there, as if the person had turned and walked straight into the door. I stood there, hand on the cold handle, my pulse thudding in my ears. Something wasn't right. I hadn't heard anything. There had been no knock, no warning. Just the cold weight of those tracks. What was I supposed to do? If someone was out there, they knew I was here. But I didn't remember hearing anyone approach. The woods were too quiet. The air was too still. I opened the door slowly, peering into the small, narrow space. The back room was empty, but the hairs on my neck stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The air was thick with tension, but there was no one there. I closed the door and backed away. The silence returned. But now, it felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was unnerving. Each day, the footsteps grew closer. The next morning, I awoke with the distinct feeling that I had been holding my breath all night. The house was still. Too still. The light filtering through the curtains was dull, the same as any other day, but everything about the air felt off. I hesitated before looking outside, fearing I already knew what I would see. I should have stayed in bed, not wanting to confront the reality of it. But I couldn't resist. When I looked outside, the yard was covered in snow again, pristine, untouched. The previous night's tracks were gone. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself that maybe I had imagined it. But as my gaze swept over the snow, I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. It wasn't the lack of footprints that disturbed me, it was the fact that, despite the fresh layer of snow, something felt wrong. The air seemed heavier, colder. There was a dampness in the air that hadn't been there before. A quiet, unnatural dampness. My heart skipped as I glanced toward the back of the house, where the footprints had once led. My feet carried me there against my will, as if I were drawn by something beyond my control. And then I saw it. The back door, slightly ajar. A small gap. Barely enough for a breath to pass through. I hadn't left it open. The door creaked as I stepped toward it, the cold, metallic scent of rusted hinges filling the air. I slowly pushed it open, my fingers numb as they gripped the handle. The room beyond was empty. But the silence was deafening, suffocating. There was something in the air, something unfamiliar, a presence I couldn't place. A weight pressing down on my chest, making each breath feel shallow and strained. I stepped inside, eyes darting from corner to corner. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But what? I turned around to close the door, and that's when I saw it. A faint print in the snow, right in front of me. It was barely visible, just a shadow of a footprint, but it was there. Small, almost imperceptible, like a whisper on the ground. My pulse quickened, and I took a step back. I wasn't alone. I could feel it now. Something was here. Something I couldn't see, but that was growing closer. With each passing moment, the air around me seemed to become denser, more suffocating. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. A low hum began to fill my ears, like a distant growl vibrating beneath the floorboards. I spun around, searching for the source of the noise, but there was nothing. Only the silence that hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. My mind raced. Was it real? Or was this some kind of trick my mind was playing on me? The isolation, the constant solitude, was it finally getting to me? Was I losing my grip on reality? I swallowed hard, shaking my head to clear the confusion. No. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong the moment those footprints had appeared. I needed to leave. But the longer I stood there, the harder it became to move. The air was so thick now, it felt like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. I reached for the door handle, ready to make a run for it, but before I could turn it, the hum intensified. A low, guttural sound coming from behind me. I froze. The air around me grew colder, the temperature dropping so quickly I could see my breath misting in front of me. My legs trembled, unwilling to move. The hum turned into a whisper, a voice too soft to understand but too close to ignore. I turned slowly, dreading what I might find. And there, standing in the shadows, was a figure. I couldn't make out its features, but the shape was unmistakable. It was watching me. I felt a chill run through me. Not from the cold, but from something else. Something far worse. My heart raced. My thoughts scrambled. Was this real? Or was it just my mind twisting everything into something terrifying? The figure didn't move, just stood there, its outline flickering in and out of view like a mirage. I took a step back, but it felt as though I was rooted to the ground. The figure's presence grew more suffocating with each passing second. Then it moved. The shadow stretched toward me, slow and deliberate. I turned and bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stumbled through the hallway, my mind racing. The house felt alive, its walls closing in. My vision blurred, and I barely caught sight of something in the corner of my eye, another set of footprints, this time inside the house. It was impossible. The tracks should have been gone by now, melted or covered in dust. But they were there. And they were getting closer. Closer to me. I didn't know how much time had passed, but it felt like hours. Hours of staring at the door, my breath shallow and erratic. Each creak of the floorboards beneath my feet made me jump. Every shadow in the corner of my eye sent my pulse into overdrive. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. That it was my mind, unraveling from the isolation, the fear of the unknown. But every time I looked at the door, the figure, the presence, was still there, lingering just outside the periphery of my sight. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here, waiting for whatever this was to come for me. But as my eyes darted around the room, I realized how powerless I was. The walls seemed to close in, the silence was deafening. I could feel the house pressing against me. Like it was alive, watching, waiting. I grabbed my coat, determined to leave, but as my hand touched the door handle, the temperature in the room plummeted. It was freezing now. My breath misted in front of me in slow, steady puffs, the cold wrapping itself around me like a vice. I hesitated, my hand trembling on the handle. I couldn't go out there. The snow, the footprints, they were closing in on me. But worse than that, I felt something in the air. A presence so heavy, it made it hard to breathe. I spun around, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The silence was suffocating. Then I heard it. A soft shuffle. Barely a sound, but unmistakable. I turned sharply, my eyes wide, my heart thundering in my chest. The figure from the shadows was closer now, closer than it had been before. I could see it in my mind's eye, but when I looked directly at it, it vanished, just like it had before. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen. The fear, it paralyzed me. Each breath felt more labored than the last, as if the air itself was turning against me. The shuffle came again, closer this time. I couldn't ignore it. It was real. It was happening. I spun around to face the window, hoping to see some sign of life outside. A neighbor. A car passing by. Anything. But all I saw was snow. Endless snow, stretching across the yard. The footprints were gone, wiped away by the storm. But the silence remained thick and oppressive. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it again. The faintest trace of movement, a figure standing just beyond the snow. Not in the yard, but at the edge of the trees. Watching me. I blinked and it was gone. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The weight of its presence pressing in on me from all sides. My instinct screamed at me to run, to leave the house. But where would I go? The snow was a barrier, a cold, unyielding prison. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, louder now, as if the world around me had quieted down entirely. Everything was still. The hum from earlier was back, vibrating through the floorboards. I gripped the door handle again, determined to leave. And then the door opened, slowly. I didn't open it. It wasn't the wind. I hadn't touched the handle. The door creaked, swinging wide as if something was inviting me out. Something that wanted me to step outside, into the snow, where the footprints waited. I could feel the temperature drop even further. The cold now seeped into my bones, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something move just beyond the door, something that wasn't human. The figure, or whatever it was no longer hiding in the shadows. It was out there, waiting for me. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was there. I could feel its eyes, boring into me, following my every move. A low whisper brushed past my ear. A voice, distant but clear. It was speaking to me. I wanted to shout, to run, to escape the madness that was closing in on me. But the fear kept me rooted to the spot. It was as if my body refused to obey, paralyzed by the terror I could not comprehend. I took a tentative step forward, toward the open door. Each movement felt like a betrayal, like I was walking toward my own doom. And then I heard it again, footsteps behind me. The same soft shuffle, growing closer with every second. I turned, my body stiff, my eyes wide with panic. And there it was, closer than ever. The figure had moved, its silhouette now standing in the hallway, just beyond the threshold of the door. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was watching me. I reached for the door again, my heart racing. I had to leave, I had to get out. But as my fingers touched the handle, I felt something cold brush against my skin. The figure was inside. It was here. And it was closer than ever. My heart raced. I could feel the coldness from the figure's touch even though I couldn't see it. A deep shiver ran through me, more intense than the biting cold of the snow outside. I tried to pull my hand away from the door, but it was like I was glued to the spot, unable to move. The air felt heavy, thicker somehow, as if the space around me was shrinking. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to cooperate. The figure, whatever it was in the room with me now. I could sense it, just beyond my sight, moving closer with every second. I had to break free from this paralysis. I yanked my hand away from the door with a force that startled me, stumbling backward into the room. My breath was coming in sharp gasps, each one cold and shallow. The silence was broken only by the sound of my frantic footsteps echoing through the hallway. Then, a voice. A whisper. I froze. It was faint, but unmistakable. Not my own thoughts, something else. Come outside. The voice was soft, almost gentle. But there was no mistaking the chill that crept into my veins when I heard it. It was as if the words themselves were made of ice, freezing my thoughts, wrapping around my heart. I glanced around the room, desperate for some sign of safety, but the walls felt like they were closing in. I needed to get out. I needed to escape. But where could I go? The door. I had to get to the door. The figure was still there, lingering just out of my view. But I could feel it moving, drawing nearer. Its presence grew stronger, almost suffocating. The air seemed to thicken with every breath I took. I backed away toward the window, my eyes searching frantically for any sign of life outside. But the snow was still untouched, the world outside silent and dark. Come outside. The voice was louder now, clearer. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was calling to me, urging me to step into the cold. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like a weight was pressing down on me. The walls felt closer, the shadows longer, and the cold, it was everywhere. I turned back to the door, the handle still slowly turning on its own. The coldness radiated from it, freezing the air around it. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward, my fingers trembling as they wrapped around the handle. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing the night beyond. The snow-covered yard was empty. Not a single footprint, not a trace of the presence I had felt earlier. I took a tentative step outside, my breath hanging in the frigid air. And then I saw them. The footprints. They were back. But this time, they weren't just in the yard. They were at the doorstep, leading away from the house, trailing into the dark, snow-covered trees. They were fresh, freshly made. No, it couldn't be. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no one else out here. No one except. The footprints led straight toward me. And they were getting closer. Each step closer, until it felt like they were right behind me. The soft shuffle again, the sound of someone moving through the snow. But no one was there. The whisper, the voice, it was closer now, almost at my ear. Come closer. I spun around, breathless, but the snow behind me was still. The trees were dark, unmoving. There was no one there. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The feeling that something was watching me, waiting. A shadow moved in the corner of my eye. I snapped my head around, and for just a moment, just a second, I saw something. A figure. It was there, standing between the trees, just beyond the reach of the light from the house. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its shape was distorted, almost like it didn't belong. The figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring each step it took toward me. My body was frozen. My legs refused to move, my hands trembling at my sides. Come closer. It whispered again, the words like ice, cutting through my thoughts, my fears. The figure moved forward, the ground beneath its feet crunching softly, deliberately. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. It was so close now, so close I could feel its presence, feel the cold emanating from it. And then, just as I thought it would reach me, Just as I thought the darkness would swallow me whole, the figure stopped. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. Waiting. A wave of dread crashed over me, and I felt my legs give way beneath me. I collapsed to the ground, staring at the figure. It was still standing there, as still as the trees around it. The snow was silent, the world still. But I could hear it. The soft, rhythmic sound of footsteps walking toward me. Closer. Closer. Until I couldn't hear anything but the soft thudding of my own heartbeat. And then, silence. The silence stretched on, suffocating, pressing against my chest. I could feel it closing in, the weight of it pressing down on me like a blanket of snow that would never melt. My heart thudded in my ears, the only sound in the cold, empty space. The figure, the presence, was still there. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The world around me had turned into a frozen nightmare. And then it moved again. Slowly, its long, shadowy form stepped forward, each movement deliberate, its presence undeniable. It wasn't rushing, wasn't hurrying to reach me. It was taking its time, savoring the moment. Its form shimmered, distorting like a mirage, flickering in and out of focus. My eyes couldn't seem to stay fixed on it for more than a second. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me. It felt like my legs were made of stone, rooted in the snow. Every time I tried to force myself to move, the earth beneath me seemed to tighten its grip. The whisper returned, a chill that slithered through my spine and took hold of my mind. Closer. The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was inside my head now, a part of my thoughts, its command inescapable. The words wrapped themselves around my mind, suffocating me until I could think of nothing else. Come closer. It repeated, its tone coaxing, pleading. I felt the ground shift beneath me, the cold creeping further into my bones. The footsteps were growing louder, now, the crunching of snow as real and tangible as the breath in my chest. I couldn't see it clearly anymore. I could only feel its presence, strong, overwhelming. It was close now, impossibly close. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I finally managed to tear my eyes away from the shifting form in front of me. My gaze darted around, searching for an escape, any escape. The house. It was behind me. But I couldn't move. The footsteps. They were louder now, faster. And then I heard it, closer, too close to ignore. The faintest sound, a soft breath, right beside me. A figure stepped into my line of sight, a shadow taller than any man, more monstrous than anything my mind had ever conjured. Its face, or whatever it was impossibly pale, like a blank canvas, smooth and featureless. There were no eyes. No mouth. Just a blank, cold face staring at me. But I could feel it. It was watching me. It knew I was there. The temperature dropped even further, biting into my skin, my breath turning to vapor in front of me. The snow crunched under its feet, the air thick with the weight of something ancient, something not of this world. I wanted to scream, to run, but my mouth was dry, and no sound came. All I could do was stare, frozen, paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of whatever it was. It reached out, its hand, or what I thought was its hand, coming toward me. Its fingers were impossibly long, stretched out like claws. I could feel the cold radiating from it, a chill deeper than any winter night. I could feel it in my bones. It touched me. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I felt the coldness seep into my skin, spreading through my veins. I couldn't feel my limbs anymore. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The figure stood over me, silent. It was like it was waiting for something, waiting for me to understand. And then, without a word, it withdrew its hand. I collapsed to the ground, my body trembling, cold and numb. My mind, still foggy, struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Was it real? Was it still there? I didn't dare look up. But the footprints in the snow remained. Closer now, right at my feet. And the whisper returned, soft but chilling, like a breath on the back of my neck. Stay with me. I wonder if you can hear it too. That sound. It's always there, just beneath the surface, waiting to rise to the top. Do you hear it? I've been walking for what feels like hours now, but the fog shows no signs of lifting. It swallows everything, streets, buildings, even the sky. Everything feels muted, distant, like I'm not really here at all. The world has become nothing more than a vague outline, an impression of itself. I don't know why I keep walking. I don't know why I'm still out here in the fog. It's not like I have anywhere to go. No purpose, no destination. Just this. My shoes crunch on the wet pavement, the sound sharp and clear in the stillness. Each step echoes back to me, but it's never the same. It changes, shifts, like the sound is coming from somewhere else entirely. Sometimes it sounds like footsteps behind me. Other times, it's the faintest murmur, a voice carried by the wind. But whenever I try to turn around, there's nothing. Just a thick gray curtain of fog, swallowing up everything in sight. No matter how many times I glance over my shoulder, there's nothing there. It doesn't help that the fog seems to be getting thicker, creeping in from all sides. It curls around the buildings, pooling in the streets like liquid. The world has become a silent, colorless void, except for the occasional silhouette of a lamppost or a distant shape I can't quite make out. My pulse quickens. I can feel it, the pressure in the air, as if the fog itself is watching me. Waiting. I shake the thought away, forcing my steps to be steady, but something about the way the echoes play with my mind makes it impossible to ignore. The first time it happened, I thought I was imagining it. A strange sound, a whisper, just beyond the edge of hearing. But the second time, it was clearer. The faintest scrape, like something dragging along the ground, just a footstep away from me. My heart skipped a beat. I stopped, froze in place, and listened, straining my ears for any other sound. Nothing. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, just the fog playing tricks on me. But the sound didn't fade. It lingered, pressing in on me, like something, or someone, was just out of sight. It's happening again now. A low scrape, followed by a soft thud, as if something is moving through the fog with me. I glance over my shoulder again. My breath catches in my throat. There's nothing. Nothing but the fog. But the sound, it's still there. Louder now. More distinct. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed. The footsteps, or whatever they are, become clearer with every step I take. It's not just an echo anymore. It's real. Something is moving behind me, matching my pace, but never quite close enough for me to see. The air grows colder, the dampness and the fog biting at my skin. I wrap my jacket tighter around myself, but it doesn't help. I start walking faster, trying to outrun the noise, but it keeps pace. The scraping sound grows louder. The thud becomes more pronounced. It's right behind me now. My heart pounds in my chest, the sound of it so loud I can't hear anything else. I don't want to look, but I can't help it. I turn, my feet frozen to the ground. The fog shifts, thickens, swirling as if it has a life of its own. I don't see anything, but I know it's there. I can feel it. I keep walking. Faster now. But no matter how quickly I go, it's always there, just out of sight, following me, waiting for me to stop. The sound of footsteps, scraping, thudding, never letting up. The fog closes in tighter around me, choking the air from my lungs, pressing on me until I can't breathe. I hear the sound again. Clearer this time. A voice, low and drawn out, almost like a whisper. Stay. The word hangs in the fog, heavy and suffocating, and for a moment, I wonder if it's just my mind playing tricks. But I can't ignore the chill that crawls down my spine. The feeling of eyes, watching me, waiting for me to do something, anything. I need to get out of here. I need to. A soft scraping sound, closer now, impossibly close. I spin around, but there's still nothing there. Just the fog. I try to move faster, but my legs feel heavy, like I'm walking through thick mud. My breath comes in ragged gasps. The sound keeps growing louder, closer, until it's all I can hear. Thudding. Scraping. That voice again, low and insistent. Stay with me. The words pulse in my mind, louder now, as if the fog itself is speaking to me. It's real. It's here. I feel it, crawling up my skin, suffocating me. I can't breathe. I run, but it's useless. The sound is everywhere. I don't know how long I've been running. Time doesn't matter here, in the fog. Each second stretches into infinity, and yet it feels like I've been trapped in this endless loop forever. The sound, the scraping, the thudding, it's relentless. It's no longer behind me. It's everywhere. In front, to the side, beneath me. The fog itself seems to pulse with the rhythm, like a living thing, breathing, waiting. My heart races, my legs burning, but I can't stop. I can't stop running from whatever this is. I don't even know what I'm running from anymore. It doesn't matter. It's just the need to escape, the need to outrun the suffocating, ever-growing presence that's closing in on me. I stumble, my foot catching on something hidden beneath the fog. I crash to the ground, my hands scraping the wet pavement. I don't stop to check if I've hurt myself. I just push myself up, my breath coming in gasps, and keep moving. The sound changes again. Now, it's not just footsteps or scraping. It's a low, guttural growl, like something hungry. My stomach twists, a knot of fear tightening around my insides. The hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I don't dare look behind me. I can't. I won't. A flicker of movement catches my eye. It's just a shadow at first, barely noticeable against the dense fog, but then it shifts. It moves, just out of my line of sight, always just beyond my reach. I feel its presence, feel it watching me, as if it knows exactly where I am, what I'm doing. I don't know where the street ends or where the fog begins anymore. The boundaries have blurred. The world has shrunk to this narrow, suffocating space, and every step feels like I'm sinking deeper into it. The walls of mist close in tighter, pressing in from all sides, and I feel the air growing colder with each passing second. The growl grows louder, almost deafening now, vibrating in my bones. It's closer, so much closer. And then, nothing. Complete silence. I freeze, my breath caught in my throat. The air is thick with tension. My pulse hammers in my ears. I wait, but the silence stretches on, suffocating, unnerving. It doesn't last long. There's a snap, like a twig breaking underfoot, and the sound of something heavy moving through the fog. It's unmistakable now. It's not just the sound of footsteps anymore. It's something more, something bigger, something far worse. I turn, panic clawing at my throat, but the fog is thick, impenetrable. I can't see past the few feet in front of me. I can't see what's there, but I can feel it. The presence. It's too close now. I can't outrun it. I hear the growl again, this time followed by something far worse, a low, rasping breath, as if whatever's out there is inhaling me, drawing in the very air I need to survive. I back up, my feet slipping on the wet pavement, but I can't seem to find my balance. I'm going to fall. I'm going to. And then, just as I feel myself losing control, something solid. A building? A wall? I don't know. My hands scramble for purchase, and I press my back against whatever it is, praying for safety. The silence is back, but it's not the comforting kind of silence. It's the kind that makes your skin crawl. The kind that makes you question if the world is even real anymore. The fog presses in from all sides, and I can't breathe, can't think, can't. A voice. A whisper. Faint, but unmistakable. Stay with me. It's the same voice. The one from before. I don't know where it's coming from, but I hear it clear as day, as though it's right next to me. I can't take it anymore. I can't stay here. I have to. The scraping sound returns, but this time it's faster, sharper, closer. I can feel something brushing against my skin, as if the fog itself is alive, reaching out to touch me, to drag me back into its embrace. I push away from the wall, stumbling forward, my feet dragging, my heart thundering in my chest. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what to do. But I can't stop. Not now. Not when the presence is so close, so suffocating. I think I see a shape. Something moving in the fog. But it's gone before I can make it out. A flash, a silhouette. But it's enough to confirm that I'm not alone. There's something here. Something that's been here with me all along. And I'm not sure how much longer I can keep running. I'm losing track of time. It's all blurring together now. Each step I take seems to echo back to me, a distorted version of its original sound. The fog is thicker than ever, wrapping itself around my body like a cold, suffocating blanket. I can barely see anything in front of me, but I don't dare stop. Not now. My lungs burn as I gasp for air, but it feels like I'm inhaling the fog itself. It's stifling. My body aches, but I can't slow down. I can't afford to. Whatever is behind me, whatever is out there, it's getting closer. I can feel it. I don't need to see it to know. The growl is back. Louder this time, deeper. It's like the ground itself is rumbling beneath me, the air vibrating with its power. I can't even tell if it's real anymore. The sound shifts and warps, turning into something incomprehensible, something ancient and terrible. I try to focus, try to make sense of my surroundings, but the fog refuses to let me. Every direction is the same, every corner a dead end. I could be walking in circles, or I could be running straight into the heart of it. The thought makes my stomach twist in knots. And then I hear it. A voice. Soft. Close. So close it feels like it's coming from inside my skull. Why are you running? The words cut through the air like a knife, sharp and piercing. My heart stops. My mind goes blank. I freeze, rooted to the spot. I know that voice. I know it. But I can't place it. Not exactly. It's familiar, yet foreign. Comforting, yet terrifying. It's calling to me like a siren song. I turn, my head jerking in the direction of the sound, but I see nothing. Just more fog. More shadows. It could be just my mind playing tricks, but the weight of it is too heavy to ignore. I can't stay here. I can't keep listening to it. But I can't stop. I feel drawn to it. The voice. It's pulling me, urging me to follow. I take a step forward, but something stops me. A feeling. A chill crawling up my spine. It's not just the fog. It's something else. Something cold and wrong. I can't breathe. My chest is tight, and every inch of me feels like it's being compressed, like the fog itself is pressing in, squeezing the air out of me. And then it happens. A figure. Just ahead. A shadow, a silhouette against the pale mist. It's too distorted, too far out of reach for me to make out any details. But I see it. I feel it. The voice speaks again, but this time it's not words. It's a sound. A low, resonating hum. It vibrates through the air, through my very bones. And it feels like it's inside me. Like it's pulling something out from deep within, some part of me I didn't even know was there. Come closer, the voice whispers, now not just in my ears, but in my mind. Come closer, and you'll understand. I can't take it anymore. The pressure, the weight, the pull of it. I start to move, against every instinct telling me to run in the other direction. My legs move of their own accord, stepping toward the figure, toward the voice. But I don't want to. I don't want to go any closer. The fog is alive. It's shifting around me, closing in on all sides, the ground beneath my feet becoming slick, like it's pulling me in. I have to stop. I have to break free. The figure ahead shifts, and I see it for a split second, a glimpse of something pale, something almost human, but not quite. Its eyes glisten in the dim light, dark and hollow. I stumble back, heart racing, but I'm too late. The sound comes again, louder this time. The growl. The deep, guttural growl, followed by the sound of heavy breathing. It's here. It's right behind me. I spin around, and there it is. I can't see its full form, but I feel its presence, the weight of it, pressing in. Its breath is hot against my neck, the hairs on my skin standing on end. I know it's not human. I know it's something else. And I know, without a doubt, that it's been following me this whole time. My mind races. I can't outrun it. I can't fight it. But I have to do something. I have to survive. I take a deep breath, my chest heaving, and I force myself to turn back toward the figure in the fog. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's the answer. Maybe it's the only way out of this nightmare. I take one step forward, and then another. But the moment I do, the fog starts to change. The ground beneath me shifts. It's no longer solid. It's soft, like quicksand. My feet sink with each step, and the growl from behind intensifies. I can hear something moving in the fog. Something massive. I push forward, desperate, my mind screaming for me to run, but my body doesn't listen. I don't know why. Maybe it's the voice. Maybe it's the fog. Maybe I'm just too tired to care anymore. But I keep moving. I have to find it. The source of the voice. The truth behind the fog. Because if I don't, I might never escape. The ground beneath me is shifting now, as though the very earth is alive, pulling me into its depths. Every step I take feels like a battle against gravity itself, my legs sinking further with each movement, the cold clinging to me, pulling me down into something darker. The fog presses in even closer, thick and suffocating, and the sounds around me, distorted and alien, grow louder, more chaotic. I can hear it again, that growl. It's not just a sound anymore, it's a presence, reverberating in my chest like the growl of a beast that has no place in this world. It's closer now, too close, and I don't dare turn around. I know that if I do, I'll see nothing but the black void of the fog, and the thing that's been following me will be there, waiting to claim me. But the voice continues to haunt me, pulling me in. Almost there, it whispers, soft and coaxing, as if luring me into a trap. I want to stop. I want to scream, to run, to flee in any direction away from this madness. But my legs betray me, forcing me forward, step after agonizing step. My heart pounds in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears, and yet the silence between the growls and the whispers is worse, more oppressive. It's as if the whole world has been reduced to a tiny, suffocating bubble, and I am the only one inside. Then, suddenly, there's a shift in the fog. I don't know how or why, but the air feels lighter. The pressure eases, just for a moment. The growl fades into the distance, and the voice is gone. It's quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that fills your head with 1,000 thoughts. The kind of quiet where you begin to wonder if you've imagined everything. If you've lost your mind. But I know it wasn't a hallucination. The fog still clings to me, heavier now, like a wet blanket smothering any hope of escape. The growl still lingers in the back of my mind, and the voice, though absent, still seems to echo within my skull. I keep moving, my feet dragging through the ever-thickening mist. The world has narrowed to nothing but this path, if even is a path anymore, and the fear in my chest grows, more suffocating than the fog itself. I can't tell where I'm going anymore, if I'm even going anywhere at all. I could be walking in circles. I could be walking toward my doom. And then I see it. A shape. Just ahead. Not a shadow this time, not a figure blurred by the fog, but something more distinct. Something more real. It's a door. Standing alone, in the middle of the fog, as though it doesn't belong. Its frame is crooked, the wood splintered and worn, like it's been abandoned for years, yet it's somehow untouched by the encroaching mist. It's the only thing in this void of nothingness that feels solid, real, tangible. I don't know why I approach it. There's no reason to. Nothing inside me says this is the way out. But my hand is already reaching toward the knob, my fingers trembling. I hesitate, and then the growl. Louder. So much closer. I freeze, my hand still hovering above the doorknob, but now I know what it is, what's on the other side. I've heard it before. That noise. That rumble. It's the sound of something massive, something beyond my understanding, and it's closing in. With a sharp breath, I turn the knob. The door creaks open. But what I see on the other side, what I feel, is not what I expected. Not at all. It's not the familiar world that should have been there, waiting for me. It's not a street, or a park, or even the comfort of home. No, it's something else. It's more fog. But it's different. The fog here is alive. It moves, it twists, it shapes itself into things. Strange, terrifying shapes that shift and writhe in the periphery of my vision. I can't make them out completely, but I can feel them. I can feel their eyes on me. I step through the door, compelled by some force I can't explain, and as I do, the door slams shut behind me. I'm trapped. The world is closing in. The fog is thick, smothering, and there's no way back. I take a shaky breath, my body trembling as I look around. The figures in the mist, they are closer now. I can see them more clearly. There are no faces, no details. Only shapes, indistinct and moving, growing more defined with every second. And then, from within the fog, something steps forward. It's not human. I don't know what it is, but it's large, towering over me. It moves with a kind of grace, but it's unnatural. Its body, if you can even call it a body, is a shifting mass of smoke and shadows. Its form flickers, changing as it gets closer, and I can't look away. The growl. It comes from this thing. But now it's not a growl. It's something worse. A low, deep sound that shakes the air itself, vibrating the very ground beneath my feet. I can't breathe. I'm not sure if it's the fog, or the thing, or something else altogether, but the world is slipping from my grasp. My mind feels distant, like I'm no longer sure where I end and the world begins. The fog is swallowing me whole, piece by piece. And yet, I can't help but take one more step forward. Because that's what the voice wants. That's what it's always wanted. To bring me closer. Closer to what? To it? To the fog? Or is it something even worse than I can imagine? I don't know. But I can't stop now. There's no way back. My heart is racing, pounding against my chest like a war drum. Every inch I move feels like I'm stepping deeper into something I don't understand, into something that's waiting for me to slip. The creature, or whatever it is, hovers just in the edge of my vision, its form still shifting, still flickering. I can't take my eyes off it, even though every fiber of my being screams at me to run. To flee. But where to? The fog surrounds me. It's oppressive, suffocating, and the ground beneath my feet has become a quagmire, pulling at my every step. I try to scream, to call out for help, to break the silence, but my voice is swallowed by the thick air. It doesn't even sound like my own voice when it escapes. It's distant, muffled, like I'm underwater. The growl comes again. This time it's closer. Too close. My breath catches in my throat, and my pulse quickens. I turn my head, but it's all the same, nothing but the swirling mist, the shadows that hide behind it, waiting. Then, without warning, the air shifts. There's a crackling sound in the atmosphere, like static building up before a storm, and I can feel the change in the air. Something has broken. The quiet is no longer just the absence of sound. It's a void, pulling everything inside it. And I'm falling faster than I can process. I want to run, to escape this oppressive, living fog. But I can't move. It's as though my feet are glued to the ground. The creature. I don't know if it's still there, if it's just another figment of my imagination, but the air is heavy with its presence. The growl echoes again, sharper, like it's right behind me. Something brushes against my shoulder. A cold, unfeeling touch. I jerk around, but there's nothing there. The fog is alive. I can feel it, in the air, in the way it moves. It's circling me. The shapes in the mist seem to pulse, to breathe with a slow, rhythmic motion, as though they are aware of me, watching me. I can't breathe. The pressure builds, pressing against my chest, and I gasp, desperate for air. My vision swims, the shadows dancing in the periphery of my sight, morphing into figures that I can almost make out, tall, looming, with faces that twist and contort in impossible ways. Their eyes are there, I can feel them, burning into me. I don't know what they are, but I know they're not human. There's something worse. Something older. Something born from the darkness of this fog. I start moving again, instinctually, though my legs are heavy, sluggish. I don't know where I'm going anymore. The path, the direction, none of it matters. It's all the same. The fog stretches endlessly in every direction. The figures in the mist seem to watch me, closing in, their eyes never leaving me. The growl rises again, louder now, filling my ears. It's not just a sound anymore. It's a vibration, a pressure that shakes my body. It's coming from everywhere, from within the fog itself. I can't stand it. I can't stay here. But there's nowhere to go. I push forward, my legs like lead, my mind struggling to comprehend what's happening. But then I hear it. A voice. So soft, so distant. But it's there. It's always been there. I've been hearing it in the background, under the growls, under the pulse of the fog. Closer. It's the same voice, the one that has been guiding me, or perhaps leading me. I don't know how much more I can take. My thoughts are fractured now, slipping through my fingers like water. My mind is coming undone, and I can't stop it. I want to scream. I want to fight, but the fog is swallowing me whole. And then, before I even realize what's happening, I'm no longer alone. The figures are upon me, surrounding me. I feel their presence, cold and unyielding. They reach out, not with hands, but with shadows. The mist moves around me, and I feel it closing in. The air grows thicker, heavier. And that's when I see it. The door. It's just ahead, barely visible through the suffocating fog. It's the same crooked, battered door I saw before, standing alone in the midst of all this madness. It beckons me, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know anymore. But it's the only thing real, the only thing that isn't shifting or twisting or slipping through my fingers. I can't stop myself. I move toward it. Every step feels like an eternity, but I reach it. The knob is cold in my hand, but it doesn't stop me. I turn it, and the door opens with a creak that echoes in the void. What lies beyond? I don't know. I step through the door, and the world goes black. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.